Hello and welcome to the channel. As always, like the video, and if you enjoyed the story, leave a comment on if you would want more. This fanfiction was not created by me, but in the description there is a link to the fanfic so you can show your support to the creator and read along. Without any more delay, let's dive into the story.
Izuku is a strange boy. Though he's no longer a boy. I think he's probably about 26 by now. Every week he goes to Sensei for aging. Every week he eats his assigned food without a grimace. He knew the plan. Never once have I heard him complain. Even when he is downing the pain meds. Even when it's obvious he can barely move when they aren't working. I can only imagine the amount of pain he's enduring to age his body 2 years every week. Sensei insisted that Izuku go with us to UA's USJ. Izuku wasn't to do anything. He was just to watch, to stand near me and beyond offering a few minor suggestions, that's all he did. Once we got back he never even asked about those we left behind. And even before that, he never asked about the numu. Sensei said the mission would help Izuku understand. And the first thing Izuku did when he stepped out of my warp gate back into the bar was look at Sensei's TV and tell the man he understood. I'm not sure what exactly Izuku understood, but there was a look in his eyes. That was different. Poetically you could say it was a light, or a fire or something, but it isn't anything like that. It's just a look, but one that speaks of determination. Tomura wasn't anywhere near as happy. He raged and he growled and complained until Sensei reminded him this was just the first strike. Izuku helped slightly then. He reminded Tomura that in his games he never got to try the boss level first. He always had to work up to it. And in some games, he had to make sure he had the right equipment before he went after the boss. This was the same. In order to defeat All Might in the system of heroes, Tomura had to make preparations. Numu was one. And maybe further iterations of Numu would be enough to defeat All Might, but more importantly was the other preparations. For victory to be real, for the rest of the sheeple to accept it, Tomura had to set the scene. The USJ wasn't a failure, but the opening move. It was a way of announcing to the world that the League was here, that he was here. I didn't think Shigaraki would accept it. He did. He nodded carefully, thoughtfully. He accepted Izuku's explanation and then he asked something I didn't expect. Tomura asked if that was what Izuku understood. Izuku confirmed it. Izuku was a strange boy AFO, it's not just age, you know. Kurojiri started. He set down the glass he had been cleaning, turning to the green-haired man who was sitting at the bar. The man's eyes were also green and for the past few hours they had been riveted on the small TV that sat on the end of the bar. Izuku? Kurojiri questioned. What Sensei is doing to me? It's not just making me older. Green eyes turned to him. If it was just age, then there's really no point. The bartender blinked, reviewing what he knew of the plan for Izuku. It wasn't much. The man was now meant to take over the legitimate industry Sensei ran, and that meant that meant he had to understand those industries. A 14-year-old couldn't. Not truly. You see? Izuku asked. He raised one hand, letting out a wave of sparks. They were pretty but not very useful. Kurojiri was surprised, not at the sparks. In order for Izuku to truly fit in, it had been necessary to give him a quirk. It wasn't a fancy one. It just produced multicolored sparks, but it was enough to ensure Izuku was socially accepted. What surprised him was that as mist, he had no expression, he had no tells. Point of fact, he was banned from playing games of chance because no one could read him, yet somehow the kid had 14 years. No, however many years old he was now, and he'd read him. I see. Age and knowledge. Izuku nodded. Though the base had to be strong, he explained. Kurojiri gave a small nod. That was why Izuku had spent the beginning of his time here reading all those political articles. So you will be CEO? Directorships, Izuku confirmed, and I think, politics. The bartender closed his eyes briefly. He understood the plan now. Izuku would control the legitimate company's sensei left to him, giving the profits to Tomura. And when he went into politics, Tomura would use the profits to create openings to bring about the changes the world needed. But Kurogiri opened his eyes, looking at the boy, who was no longer a boy. Everyone had their reasons. Everyone did things for some reason. He supported the ancient man because he didn't like to remember those reasons, but what drove a 14-year-old to follow Sensei? What drove a 14-year-old to give up who knew how many years of his life, to abandon everything? It was a personal question. Villains didn't usually ask each other why they chose that life. Some were more than happy to proclaim it to the world. Others held their reasons close. Izuku had never hinted. Kurogiri had taken his loyalty on faith because Sensei said it was so. Why? His question was soft, almost hesitant, indicating that Kurogiri knew he shouldn't really be asking. Izuku gave him a grin. Even with aging, it was infectious. To stop that, he replied immediately, gesturing towards the small TV. Kurogiri looked. It took him a moment to see what was happening. The TV displayed the UA Sports Festival and he recognized a medal ceremony. Except it wasn't quite right. The winner was tied to a post on the podium and muzzled? He blinked and looked again, but the scene didn't change. The boy really was muzzled and his hands and feet were tied. He was glaring at everything. That, Izuku repeated. He pointed his hand towards the TV, letting out another stream of sparks that winked out as they hit the screen. That? Kurogiri couldn't help but question. He wasn't sure what was going on with the UA ceremony, and he was reasonably sure that adding sound wasn't going to help. His name is Katsuki Bakugo. The bartender nodded. Izuku had been watching the entire proceedings. Present Mike, who was acting as one of the announcers, would have said the UA kid's name at some point. An arrogant, stuck-up twat who believes that to be the number one hero requires grinding everyone else underfoot. Kurogiri gave Izuku a look. That wasn't anything Present Mike would have said. There was history there with the way the words had been spat. Was this the one Izuku had wanted the paper for? He had gotten into UA. Izuku knew what the look meant and gave the bartender a smile. In any other situation, the smile gracing his features might have been considered charming, but Kurogiri could see the sharp lines of anticipation that defined it. It was not nice anticipation either. We all have our personal nemeses, Izuku told him softly. Ah, that explained it. Every villain had history. It was nice to finally see some of the boys, though not everything was explained. Kurogiri could intimate quite a bit. He poured a beer and set the schooner in front of Izuku. To stepping stones, he told the boy. The smile changed, this time becoming genuinely pleased. Izuku reached out, wrapping his hand around the glass and holding it high in salute. To stepping stones. AFO the UA Sports Festival is not really a viewing selection of choice for villains. Not many think that far ahead. 4. Those who do, then it's required viewing, but most focus on the third years. Very few ever bother with the first years, and to be fair, coverage of the first year's events isn't anywhere near as comprehensive as the third year's. Still, the bar had the stream, and Tomura didn't really watch it. Izuku did. I was slightly surprised. He's about 35 now. Tall, lanky, but with an enviable muscle tone. At least, the tone is after each session with Sensei. Each week he still tries to build up fat. Not as much now, but some. He watched the first years and I don't think he blinked. It took me a moment to remember he's same age as them. Then I wondered if I should still give him milk or juice, or if. It's odd when the body is not the same as the mind. He looked at me during the medal presentation. He gave me a smile. It was I didn't know if I should shiver or not. And then the kid explains. He tells me that Sensei isn't just aging him, he's also teaching him. It makes sense. With all the quirks Sensei has been exposed to, I'm not surprised he has one that forces knowledge into another's head. It would make explaining things easier if you could just make someone know what you knew. In this case, Izuku was getting additional information on the businesses he's meant to run. He's getting 20 or more years of general experience that he doesn't have. I think that just proves that Izuku is a very intelligent person. Though, he has his own motivations. It's nice to see them. I can relate to them. Tomura can, and so will the others who have to join. So will the others Izuku will have to relate to in the business world. Of course, they will never know his true motivation, but the fact that he has goals and desires will resonate with them. That's what's important. Even if they are dark. But that's the nature of villainy, and there can be no doubt that even if so far he's done nothing, Izuku Midoriya is a villain. I thought it was a lovely scene of quiet domesticity. That is, if one didn't know who the people were. The first was a young man named Izuku Midoriya was sitting at the bar. He was dressed plainly in dark slacks and a t-shirt and was intently reading a tablet. A protein shake was in front of him, about half drunk. The bar wasn't attended. Instead, its usual attendant, Kurogiri, known to most as one of the key members of the League of Villains, was wiping down some of the tables and generally cleaning. Occasionally the bar did see legitimate customers. Occasionally. Sensei's TV was set to voice only, and there was an aura of anticipation around the electrical item. Or at least as much of an aura as any electrical product could give off. Tomura wasn't present. The teen was still asleep, but he was known to sleep late every opportunity he could, and today he'd claimed that he was going out late. Izuku sighed, finishing the article he was reading, before he looked towards Sensei's TV. The League will be lucky if he joins, he commented, reaching out for his shake. Kurogiri quirked his head. Tonight they were going to ask the hero killer Stain to join the League. Joining was a little bit more complex than just being asked, but if Stain agreed, then he definitely had the potential. Except Izuku didn't seem to think it would happen. That is only one outcome, Izuku, Sensei's voice said. Kurogiri could hear the instruction for Izuku to think about the others. Izuku sat up, swallowing a large gulp from his protein shake before he spoke. The first outcome is that everything goes perfectly, he said. The mist villain stopped to listen. Izuku had a very analytical mind. Sensei was fostering that, but not so that he could become a new strategist. Or maybe that wasn't quite true, except Izuku's strategies wouldn't be applied for the League. They were going to be applied for the plan. The overall plan. The League instantly gains credibility and gets a good boost in reputation, feeding off his reputation. Something he probably wouldn't care about since he's not driven by a desire for fame. That was a fair assessment. Stain was one of those lone wolf villains who acted. He didn't posture, and his kill count spoke for itself. He would be a great asset to the League, which was the reason they were going to ask him to join, or at least ally. The second outcome is that he allies with the League, Izuku continued, mirroring Kurogiri's thoughts. Again, the League gains credibility and a reputational boost, but there are dangers with it. Allies are not bound by the chain of command, and since he's freelance, so to speak, he won't be asking the League's opinion before he strikes at anyone. Izuku shook his head, clearly indicating that he didn't really like that prospect. I doubt the League will want any hero kept alive, but you never know. There was something in the way Izuku said it that made Kurogiri wonder. He glanced at Sensei's TV, confident that the man would notice the movement, but the League's founder said nothing. That could mean anything. Izuku might be talking about some nebulous plan for the future, or he could be talking about something going on now. It was a reminder to Kurogiri that while he was the acknowledged strategist for the League, he wasn't their ultimate strategist. That was Sensei, And even if Izuku was talking about some nebulous idea, he was sure that Sensei, if he thought the idea was good, would make something of it. The third outcome is that he is insulted and just walks away, Izuku said. If it becomes known that Stain rejected the league, then that may make recruiting difficult in the future. So how would you turn that situation into an advantage? Sensei pressed Izuku. The man-boy took another gulp of milkshake. Stain won't advertise that he rejected any offer. At least, not directly. He's not that kind of man. So the first step to turn rejection to the league's advantage is to ensure only trusted members of the league attend any meeting with him. That is done, Sensei said. What else? The league's goals are similar to Stain's, but not the same. A few slight rewordings, and a bit less ranting would make them almost identical, without compromising ours. Why would we be seen to lessen our goals? Kurogiri asked, having finished cleaning the tables. He walked back to the bar, putting the rag into a small hamper before pulled out a fresh one and began polishing the glasses. Because at the moment, he is popular. To ride that wave, the league must seem to be a part of that wave, Izuku explained. Though it might be too subtle. And it would take too long. Something else, Sensei ordered. Izuku looked down at his tablet. He tapped it a few times. Kurogiri watched the screen change several times. The man-boy began muttering, but he quickly moved to quieten himself by taking the straw of his shake into his mouth. Sensei seemed content to wait. Given that I think Stain will reject the league, I suppose it's fair I think of some way to get something out of it, Izuku said eventually. And you have? Sensei questioned with a note of expectation. I think I have something workable, Izuku admitted. The league needs to take advantage of the fact that Stain won't specifically deny an alliance. It's not like he has any opportunity to either. As far as I can tell, he has no interaction with anyone except for those heroes he kills. Of course, he has to talk to someone, but he's keeping his public persona separate from his private one. So that is the league's opportunity. Kurogiri could see the truth of Izuku's words, and he could see the opportunity provided by that opening, but he wasn't sure how to capitalize on it. Not in a way that was reliable. If the league runs a simultaneous operation in whatever city Stain is, then the media will draw their own conclusions. The league doesn't even have to do much, just being seen should be enough. After a couple of missions, if the relationship then breaks down, it won't matter, it will already be established. Izuku tapped one finger on the bar. Very good, Izuku, Sensei praised. However, you are dissociating again. Sorry, Sensei, the man-boy said, hanging his head. Why? You are as much a part of the league as Tomura, Sensei said gently. It was then Kurogiri realized that Izuku had been saying the league instead of we. That was a problem. I don't want to make a mistake, Sensei, later when it really matters. Izuku, Sensei's voice was reproving. Do you not trust your own abilities? Physically, Izuku might be much older than his real age, but Sensei was older than them all, and when he spoke like that, Kurogiri knew he hadn't done anything wrong, but even he felt cowed at the tone. No, Sensei, it's just just nothing, Izuku. You are a part of the league, and you will refer to yourself as such. Ami understood? Yes, sir, Izuku said softly, but it wasn't a whisper. Sensei didn't like it when his orders were answered with whispers. Very good, the voice from the TV accepted Izuku's words. I will give Tomura several numu for some missions, he added, speaking to Kurogiri. Stain will be a benefit to the league, Sensei said. One way or another, he added before the TV went blank. Izuku sighed. I'm sorry, Kurogiri, he said before swallowing the last of his shake. Izuku? The worn villain asked, not sure why he was being given the apology. I am a part of the league. The bartender nodded. That you are, he agreed. That you are. Words wouldn't change that Afop Tomura is continuing to learn lessons Izuku appears to already know. Case in point, Stain. The vigilante doesn't share the same goals as the League, but he has his own agenda. He has his own beliefs. Tomura didn't respect that and so didn't understand. I think he does now. But again, Izuku had to explain why the coverage at Hosa focused on the vigilante, despite the damage the three numus did. It's really not that hard to understand even without the knowledge of beliefs and ideals. Even though he was captured, Stain has killed heroes, and killed one of the UA's first-year hero students. That gets news time. The League, though infinitely more dangerous, has just got property damage to our name. And the forced retirement of a first-year hero course student. Officially, that is. Unofficially, if you include Sensei's record then. But most don't include Sensei's record, and so to the world we aren't that dangerous. Not yet, anyway. That's the future though. Izuku understands that even if people do not agree with Stain, they understand what he is wanting. There is an appeal to Stain's motivation, to the vigilante's beliefs. There is a lure in wanting to make a hero truly a hero rather than the fakes we have now, because it is simple. If the heroes of today were truly heroes, in the way they are meant to be, rather than just those with flashy quirks, and the desire for riches and public acclaim, then there wouldn't be many villains. But such is not the world we live in. Izuku is almost ready to go into the world. He looks like a younger middle-aged man. Soft-spoken, but there is a drive in his eyes that I've only ever seen in those who are truly willing to do anything to succeed. He hides it well. He relates well to those few patrons who come to the bar. Jiren likes him. The two have long chats, but it's more than that. Izuku is truly likable in a way. Tomura isn't. Sometimes. I shouldn't. It's wrong. I shouldn't doubt Sensei. I know he's the master tactician in a way that just can't be described, but sometimes I wonder if it's not Izuku who should get everything. And by everything I mean everything. The League and the legitimate businesses that are Sensei's cover. I wonder if Izuku shouldn't be the one to replace Sensei. I think he could do it in a way that Tomura cannot. Doubts are new. I've never had doubts before. But no. I cannot doubt. Sensei has never been wrong. He's not wrong now, Afop Kirojiri. The bartender turned to the voice. It came from the TV that displayed only darkness. Sensei. He nodded. Come to me. The instruction was firm. Behind the bar, black mist expanded in all directions before it vanished. Kirojiri worked himself into the room Sensei spent the most time in. It was a simple room overlooking the warehouse the numus were stored in. The ancient man was sitting and appeared to be looking out into the warehouse. There were several tanks there, each containing a numu at various stages of completion. The newest, those barely begun, looked mostly human. The liquid kept them asleep and there was a respirator on their faces to ensure they could breathe. You have doubts, Sensei spoke before Kirojiri could. The warp gate villain froze for an instant. The constant movement of the mist that made up his form didn't move before he sighed. I'm sorry, Master, he managed to say. Regret colored his tone, but there was no denying the ancient man's statement. The master villain looked over at him. Of course, he wasn't really looking. Not with the top part of his head being a featureless mass, but Kirojiri knew he was being examined. I understand, it's natural, he replied. Izuku is many things that Tomura is not, the ancient man saw straight to the heart of Kirojiri's concerns. That is true, Kirojiri replied when the silence between them stretched. That is why Izuku has a different path than Tomura. Sensei's lips curled into a knowing and somewhat pleased smile. But his path is just as important. Possibly even. The ancient man stopped speaking as his smile grew. Kirojiri knew that his master was engrossed in thoughts of the future. One that requires him to be older? Kirojiri prompted, ignoring the unfinished sentence. Indeed. Sensei gave a small chuckle. Do you know what he said to me when I told him I could make him older? The bartender shook his head. Izuku didn't tell anyone much of what happened in the sessions he spent with Sensei. The quirk I've been using to age him is usually fatal, Sensei said, instead of replying directly. It is a form of immortality that relies on stealing years from others. Usually the body of the one who lost the years can't handle the strain, especially if too many years are taken at the one time. The body ages, using all its resources, and then dies of exhaustion. But if you take only a few years at a time, to a body that is prepared and has been supercharged, then they survive. Kirojiri nodded. That explained the need for the high-calorie, high-protein, high-calcium foods and the multivitamins Izuku had been required to have. They were what kept him alive. Before I started though, Izuku told me I was welcome to the years. He told me to use them well. Again Sensei chuckled. His dedication at such a young age is admirable. Tomura, Kirojiri felt obligated to point out. Does not count, Sensei overrode his objection. Tomura was raised to his position. Izuku could have been so different but, he isn't. He's ours and he will play a role in changing this ugly world, just like we all will. The ancient man smiled. It was a particularly pleased smile of one who knew that things would work out for him. If I could, I would give him all for one eye, but my quirk is not transferable. I've given him 2 others instead. Kirojiri felt his eyes widen. That was... Sensei had never even suggested anything like that in the past. He forced himself to breathe normally as he considered the words. 2 quirks? Izuku had been open in displaying showers of sparks. He had never even mentioned another quirk. The warp villain knew better than to ask, but he would watch for any sign. And I will give Izuku a new name, a perfect name for one who is going to be in the spotlight, for one who will stand there and not be truly known. The bartender shifted slightly. It indicated his question. He understood that Izuku would be in the spotlight in the way the League should never be. The League would get acknowledgement, would get reported on, but that was just like any other villain. They would not be available for interviews. Izuku, as the acknowledged controlling interest in Sensei's legitimate businesses, would have to respond to the news, the other stakeholders, the other board members. He would be seen and his motives known. There was no fear that he would be recognized. Izuku still looked like his younger self but was obviously a middle-aged man. Some might suspect a family relationship, but there would be none to find. Kirojiri already knew the papers and identity that Sensei would supply to Izuku would be perfect. He would have a history, he would be his new name. Ikimo Kuriosan Nai Kakariti, Sensei said the words. In English, the ancient man prompted. Hidden in plain sight, Kirojiri translated the phrase. Yes. Since All Might so likes his American, Izuku's new name will reflect that, in an appropriate mockery, of course. His name will be Imoko Kakari. Kirojiri nodded. It was a mockery. One that was hidden so that only those who knew would understand, but it was enough. Usually Sensei didn't bother with such gestures. He was above them, but occasionally he indulged. Master, Kirojiri said gently. You have questions? I do. Again the ancient man smiled. You really only have one question, he murmured. Why Izuku? He stated the question for Kirojiri. The Warp Gate villain made no movement for a few moments before he nodded again. That really was the only question that mattered. Everything else he might want to know came from that question. Yes. Why Izuku? Surely there was someone else of the right age Sensei could have used to run his business empire. Why take a 14-year-old and have to do aging, quirk, information, everything? Truly, using Izuku complicated things. It is true that Izuku adds complexity, Sensei admitted, reading his thoughts. Kirojiri knew the man wasn't truly reading his mind, but the ancient villain had known him for a very long time. He knew what movements meant what. But the advantages outweigh the complications. Advantages? Sensei smiled. Another contented knowing smile. His will. His charisma. Those things cannot be faked. Those things cannot be a mere act. His lack of knowledge has been fixed. He's now every bit as knowledgeable as someone who has lived the years I took from him. The only weakness he has now is social interaction and contacts. Which is not a weakness, Kurogiri pointed out. Sensei had more than enough contacts who could cover for Izuku. Imoko. Who would swear on their mothers? Graves that they had known Izuku for all their lives, even if they had been the one to put there. Mothers in those graves. They would do whatever Sensei told them, and they would like it. Kurogiri took a deep breath. He's not just going to run companies, is he? This time Sensei actually chuckled. Kurogiri remembered something Izuku had said previously. Directorships and politics, the warp villain said. Sensei waved one hand. Japan has come a long way in ridding itself of many cultural insecurities such as racism. We now accept those of mixed origin far more easily. I am forced to allow that it's one of the few good things All Might has inflicted upon this country, but one thing Japan has not been able to change is our love of old politicians. That was all the explanation he gave. It was enough. 30, even mid-20s would have been old enough to take over the directorships of some companies. It would have been young, but Izuku, with the right backing, would have been fine, especially as the shell companies Sensei ran. All had overseas ties. They could have played off that. But politics was still an old man's game. Izuku was still young for it, but it would be enough. You see, different paths, Sensei said. It was nice that he didn't point out that their conversation had started about doubts. Kurogiri nodded. Sensei always covered all the angles. Even with the extra members of the league around, it's been quieter in the bar without Izuku. Imoko as he's known now. As expected, Sensei had made sure he had the appropriate papers and had told his contacts to set Imoko Kakari up in the system. Imoko just walked into his directorships as if he owned the companies. Which on paper, he did. After that, we didn't see him much. He only dropped in when he could afford to get away. A man who runs those businesses has no right to be in a bar like mine. I like my bar, but I can admit that. Imoko was the one to suggest another way of keeping contact. In the aftermath of Stain, the league gained new members. Izuku, despite his previous quirkless status, was always interested in quirks. He knew what their abilities were. Himiko Toba can change her form when she ingests someone's blood. Imoko suggested that she be set up as his wife. Sensei didn't like that idea, but the concept was good. Toga won't be Izuku's wife. It has too much exposure and she is, flighty is probably the best way of saying it. Instead, Toga will be his mother, and Imoko, being the good boy that he is, will have dinner with her once a week. That way he can keep in communication with us, and we can keep calms up with him. And it reinforces his image. Toga likes the idea, but she has always had something of a soft spot for Izuku, even though she's only met him a couple of times, even though he was much older than her. I think it was because he never let her get away with shit. Or maybe she just likes older men. The small unit has already been purchased and Mrs. Kakari already exists in the system. According to the records, Imoko bought his mother the apartment several years ago. I wonder sometimes if he misses his real mother. He has never mentioned her. He is 14, maybe 15 now, despite how old his body looks and despite the information Sensei has put in his head. I think he must, but Sensei said it best. Izuku's dedication is admirable. It is worthy of respect. Maybe that's how Izuku already learned the lessons Tomura is still learning. I only hope Tomura learns them in time. I get the feeling there is something coming. But that could just be my pessimism. Still, you don't get a long career without listening to your feelings. AFO, you've done what? The voice echoed around the room, catching the attention of almost everyone there. The only one who didn't look to the speaker was the boy tied in the middle of the bar. He was still unconscious. One thing the outraged question made clear was that one of the lessons Sensei had Izuku learn was oration. He had put an impressive amount of emotion into his voice. That was a good thing. He was talking to crowds in a bid to be elected. He'll join us, Tomura was certain. He gestured his hand towards the boy who was tied in the chair. The boy was in his hero suit, though the large gauntlets he had previously worn had been removed. No. He won't. Izuku was certain. He's not even a poor replacement for Muscular. How did he get taken out anyway? There was silence from the bar. The rescue heroes, Kurogiri told Izuku. Though we got ragdoll. He seemed to think about it for a moment, working out what the battle would have been like in his mind before he nodded. Muscular was strong, but the wild Pussycats had experience in teamwork. I still can't believe this is why you canceled dinner with Toga this week, he huffed. Oh, baby boy. You do care. Toga purred, licking at one of her knives. No one commented on that. The rest of the league just watched. They weren't certain who this man was. Most of them had never seen him. Looking at him, Izuku was far too well dressed to be here, but he was. His obvious familiarity with Tomura and Kurogiri was throwing them off guard. He'll join us. And then the world will see what a hero really is. Tomura said again. Izuku took a deep breath. He turned his eyes from Tomura, glaring at the unconscious boy tied to the chair. Kurogiri recognized the kid. He was the first-year winner of UA's sports festival. Katsuki Bakugo. The one Izuku had history with. Though Kurogiri still didn't know what history. There had never been an opportunity to ask. Izuku took the few steps to the chair before he leant over and shoved his face into Katsuki's. The angles were odd, but the glare was unmistakable. He won't. This time Izuku's voice was soft. This kid is arrogant and self-centered, but the one thing he's always wanted is to be a hero, Izuku explained. He doesn't see the power of the alternatives. Like you? Tomura spat. Izuku looked up at him, giving him an odd smile. Like me, he confirmed. Though really, I have to thank Katsuki for his part in opening my eyes. Well, you can thank him when he's one of us. There was a snort from Izuku and he muttered something in English. To Kurogiri, it sounded suspiciously like when pigs fly. Izuku took a deep breath. Anyway, the routine report is on the bar, and the money has been transferred, he told Tomura before he looked to the blank TV on the bar. I should have my first elected position soon, he said to Sensei. Kurogiri was glad his form was expressionless. The looks from the others were interesting, especially given that Sensei didn't answer. Izuku turned his eyes away from Sensei's TV. It's time for me to go, he added with a nod towards the warp villain. Same time next week, baby boy. Toga crowed. The bartender returned the nod and the gate opened. Izuku stepped through, going back to his supposed mother's apartment. Tomura huffed as the gate vanished. He scratched at his neck. So who was that? The question came from more than one of the league. Kurogiri noticed the way Dabi was staring at the place Izuku had stood. His eyes were particularly piercing before he blinked and looked away. What did he know? He's my Toga. Was cut off. Not anyone you need to worry about, suffice to say he is loyal to the league. Tomura wasn't the only one to stare at the small TV. It wasn't often that Sensei spoke when everyone was present. Question this Bakugo now, Tomura, Sensei continued. You think the brat's right? Kurogiri could see the way Tomura's eyes widened slightly. It was an improvement. He was thinking. I suspect Imoko was more informed about this particular UA student than most, Sensei replied in that way he did. He didn't often contradict Tomura. He seemed content to guide the younger man. Kurojiri resisted the urge to rub at his eyes. The situation was just getting more complex all the time and he suspected they didn't have the time to muck around. You would think after so long I would have learned to trust my instincts. I could feel something was going to go wrong. I just didn't expect that wrong thing to be All Might coming through the wall. Of course, in hindsight it is obvious. The league attacked UA, wounding one of their students to the point where he had to pull out from school entirely as a cripple. Stain killed one of their precious students and now the league kidnapped another. UA would be desperate to get the brat back, to prove to the public the strength of heroes. I don't remember much of anything. From what the others have told me, the attack wasn't long after Imoko left and we were saved by Sensei. I have seen the footage of the fight, and the reveal of the true form of All Might. But it doesn't change the fact that we are now on the run. Tomura is the head of the league. Toga is out now, for her weekly meeting with Izuku. She's been told if there is any doubt of his loyalty to kill him. She'll be back. And Imoko will still be alive. Tomura has yet to learn that Izuku is loyal. He will, when the resources keep coming, though some will be consumed setting up a new base and recovering our losses. Some of the scientists used to create the numus were also saved. They can make numus without Sensei, though it will be more difficult. Tomura was happy to hear that at least, though I suspect he focused on the can make part without hearing the difficult. No matter, he will learn. I feel like crap. It's been a week but I still hurt. Not that I resent Sensei. I am thankful the man has a quirk that could forcefully activate other quirks, or it would all be over. But forcible activation hurts and I need to rest. I'm not sure I'm going to get that rest, but I'll do what I can. Imoko honey. Mother. To any watching, it was a touching sight. As it was meant to be. Imoko moved and gave his mother a hug, patting her lightly on the back. Is everyone okay? He whispered the question. Yes, Toga whispered back, her usual jovial nature subdued. They parted quickly and Imoko moved further into the apartment, taking off his shoes as the door closed. Good to hear, Izuku said as they moved together. Do you need anything specific? The question was vague enough, and was one a good son might ask his mother. The apartment's secure, Toga told him. I've been here 4 hours. Izuku nodded. Something to do, he murmured. Yes. I checked everywhere. Besides, who would be interested in you? He didn't reply. She knew who would be interested. Just be thankful I don't have a bodyguard. Do you need any specific supplies? Toga shook her head as she moved into the kitchen. She had ordered in dinner earlier and was keeping it warm. Misty is still hurting but he will heal. The worst of it is that we've been stuck in some dingy room all week. You'll probably have to stay there a little longer, he murmured sympathetically but was equally thankful to hear that Kurojiri was fine. He liked the warp villain. Though once the heat has died down a bit, I'm sure Tomura will have planned something. Heh, she giggled. He's still crying for his sensei. Izuku's eyes flashed. Sensei is a great man, he said firmly. Toga took the hint. The other members of the league would be surprised but they didn't know Imoko like she did. The weekly dinners had given her a chance to get to know Izuku. He wasn't known for his physical fighting ability but he was good at it. She had sparred with him a few times. Nothing serious, just scuffles really. She'd never won. He always said something that made her stop. Himiko also knew his tone of voice. When he used that one, there was no arguing with him. And truthfully, Toga wasn't sure what to think of the man who had gone toe-to-toe with All Might, despite the injuries he was bearing. I got you lots of food, she changed the subject. Izuku was silent for a moment longer before he nodded. Thank you. You always eat so much, she complained, laying out some of the food on the table. If I ate that much I'd be fat. Even with your quirk? Izuku asked. Change of shape doesn't take much, Toga shrugged. It looked odd coming from the body of an old woman. The residue? Izuku pressed. When she changed forms she almost melted, and that had to be generated from somewhere. Okay. I can eat a bit more, she relented. But not as much as you, Himiko growled, gesturing with her chopsticks to the mounds of food in front of Izuku. It was far more than her portion. Politely put, it was a generous serve for a healthy young man. More accurately put, it would comfortably feed a family of 4 adults. Let's just say my quirk uses more, he murmured, digging into the food. What do dash? She stopped. Izuku gave her a lopsided smile and a trail of sparks showered over them. She knew better than to ask that question. Sensei has been incarcerated in Tartarus, so tell Tomura there's no point in attacking that. He won't want to hear it, but he has to. Toga gave him a brief nod. She knew that all too well about their leader. He's looking for allies. Izuku chuckled. Allies? She didn't reply. That's all she really needed to say. Izuku continued to eat. Katsudon, he asked, reaching for a new dish. You got me katsudon? Himiko looked to the side. It was odd to admit it. It was to celebrate, she conceded. There wasn't much to celebrate this week, but Izuku had won his election. The results had been lost in the revelation about All Might's true form and the speculation about who Sensei was and what his ability was. The heroes were keeping that quiet. They didn't want the truth to be known. Thank you, Izuku said as he started on it. He had won an almost impossible election, coming from literally nowhere to win the hearts and minds of his constituents. Part of his study of politics had been to understand how it had changed since quirks evolved. The old Diet of Japan had been revamped. It was different, though at the heart of it there was still representation of the people, but it was still somewhat corrupt. As the Americans like to say, money talks. And Izuku, Imoko Kakari, had a lot of words. Is there anything else we need to know? Izuku shook his head. It's too early for me to get that information. I have to be confirmed in the house first, then I can start requesting official documents. Don't worry, I will as soon as I can, but I can't do something stupid like request to visit Sensei. Acting scared about that big bad villain who took out All Might and asking what will happen to him is acceptable, anything more will raise suspicion. He said, summon the perfect voice for acting scared. Toga grinned. She knew what Izuku meant, and while she didn't know the long-term plan, having someone loyal to them elected in the House of Parliament, that was big. It meant the League was really going to change the world. Tomura is still mourning the loss of Sensei, but the regular shipment of cash and information from Izuku at least assured him of the I'm not sure what to call him, boy or a man. Whatever it should be, Tomura is not worrying about Izuku's loyalty. Which is good, because he is figuring out what Sensei wanted him to do, what Sensei wanted him to become. It is interesting to compare the two, Tomura and Izuku. Tomura has never doubted what he wants, but he has stumbled upon the way to getting it. Izuku was pointed in the right direction and started running. But they must both work together to change the world. Tomura will create the atmosphere. Izuku will capitalize on it. Japan's government, the Diet as it used to be called, is no longer multi-layered. That took too long to make decisions. There is now a single House of Representatives. There are still political parties, but with the emergence of quirks 200 years ago, many things changed. There are a lot more independents as well, and they can put forth bills that then become legislation. It's early days yet, Izuku has just been sworn in, but I think even Tomura knows it's just a matter of time. His video games were good for something. Sometimes, you just have to wait. For now he needs to cement the deal with the 8 Precepts of Death. If we can control their drug, or at least be perceived to control their drug, then that gives us the upper hand. It's all about reputation, expectation, and perception. Tomura is learning, a fop, that's it exactly. There were a lot of traditions with being elected, Imoko knew nothing about. Fortunately, there were helpers, public servants who acted to guide him around to this event, and then that event. Like the one now. Apparently it was traditional for all the newly elected representatives to gather for drinks. Just the first-termers as they were called, no matter what party affiliation they had. Which was annoying but wasn't so bad. It saved him from having to speak with them one-to-one. So, best to look at the silver lining and all that. The heroes have taken a battering in public opinion polls lately, Hideaki Akiyama said. What? You don't credit those calling for them to be disbanded? Shichiro Fukui was aghast at the suggestion, even if he made it. Of course not. Hideaki chuckled dismissively. Those calls always exist from the nutters. Imoko reminded himself that this was a private event. Hideaki would never speak that way in front of the public. Knowingly at least. They just sound louder in an echo room. Still, Masami Sato interposed softly. She was a smaller woman but being party affiliated, she had already made her maiden speech. There must be something we can do. The government pays for heroes after all, and them looking bad just makes us look bad. There is, Imoko said. As soon as this supposed league is in custody, the calls will wait. What did you say, Kakari? Hideaki demanded. There is a way we can help, Imoko repeated with an endearing smile. Oh, this I gotta hear, Hideaki snorted. The others just looked interested, but in that polite way that said they would hear the unknown out before dismissing whatever he said. Imoka's smile didn't change, instead pulled out his phone and tapped it, bringing up an image. Do you remember this? He asked, holding up the image for them all to see. Air? No, what is that? He chuckled. That was the podium for the first years at UA's sports festival, Imoko explained. The image clearly displayed a bound and muzzled Katsuki Bakugo staked in first place. And what does that have to do with anything? Hideaki is correct. Heroes have taken a battering in public opinion lately. They are almost on a par with us. The little joke brought a few titters of half-hearted laughter. But it is not just the actions of the heroes which contribute to that battering. The actions of this league help, but in all cases the heroes have won, Imoko said, hiding the bile in his voice at that. They'd won up until now. Usually that would be enough to keep public opinion high, but it's images like this that make the public doubt, he elaborated. This is a hero in training, one who wouldn't even graciously accept his victory. We might think it funny, but what does the public see? While his audience were all newly elected representatives, they were all politicians, they knew what drove public opinion. They saw his point. You said there is something we can do to help? Masami reminded everyone that was the point of the conversation before they could go on a tangent. There is, Imoko insisted. We need to show the public that heroes, even heroes in training, are true heroes. And I think we can do it in such a way that benefits the heroes as well. Oh ho! That is a bold claim. It's true. I wanted to be a hero once, Imoko gave a depreciating smile. I think everyone does at one point in their life, but when I looked into it, I really didn't like the stats. Do you know there is no mandated health care for them? Their insurances cover it, but you'd think there would be something. And there is no mental health care, he added. Beyond memorizing things for tests, there is no psychological checks for those training to become heroes, and there's definitely nothing for you once you become a hero. He shook his head theatrically. We give heroes all these rights: the right to use their quirk, the right to use deadly force, and there is no psyche check on them? Can you imagine what that does to them? All right, Imoko, we aren't your constituents, Masami chuckled lightly. Your point is made. A glance at the others indicated she was right. They nodded. Shichiro looked concerned. What do you mean there is no psyche check? He demanded. I mean there is no psyche check. We don't know why any hero is being a hero beyond the fact that they are qualified. And that's how we can help heroes regain public trust. 1. We look at how to get more mental health care to our existing heroes, but for those in training, we look at putting in some psyche checks and testing, to ensure those training to be heroes are doing it for the right reasons. Otherwise, all we could be training is highly paid, government-sanctioned killers. Imoko held up the image of Katsuki again. While he'd been speaking, he had zoomed it in on Bakugo's face to show his wild eyes and the way he was straining. It made his point nicely. Masami nodded. While they might be new to the House of Representatives, they knew politics. They knew the polite facade that covered some heroes. I'll talk to the higher-ups, she indicated. Imoko nodded, while Hideaki looked outraged. He was no doubt appalled that Imoko would just let her walk away with his suggestion. I'll give you some proposals, Imoko said. Hideaki nodded his understanding, and Imoko could see how he was being re-evaluated. He wasn't a complete fool. He wasn't going to let an established party take full credit for what would be seen as a good investment in the future, but he did recognize that as an independent he needed to work with the parties to get what he wanted through. Holding them hostage was not the way to go. It was better to suggest policies that made them look good, yet still achieved his aim. Masami gave him a soft smile. She knew what they were thinking. It was obvious, but sounding out the new independence was one of the things the higher-ups had expected her to do this meeting, and she knew what she was going to report. Imoko could be worked with and seemed sensible. Hideaki was still hanging on to his ideals as an independent. He'd be too standoffish to truly work with, and Shichiro. She wasn't sure about Shichiro yet. I look forward to working with you all, Imoko said to cover the small silence that had grown between them. The responses were as expected. AFO Dabi has been looking at us oddly lately. The boy isn't anywhere near as powerful as he thinks he is, but he is intelligent. It's not the same intelligence as Sensei or Tomura, rather it is a sly intelligence. I don't think Tomura has noticed the looks. Dabi is thinking about something, he's trying to make a decision without all the information. I know what that looks like. It won't come to a head yet, but it's something to be wary of. I don't believe he will betray us given he is the leader of Vanguard Action Squad, but being cautious is the norm. The 8 precepts are being problematic. They want more time. They want more money. They want more support. They just want. They seem to be treating us as if the league is no longer relevant. Respectful, yes, because we were led by Sensei, and any man who can stand against All Might has the respect of the underworld. But they believe themselves are equal. Tomura is letting it be for the moment, but it will come to a head soon. I have faith that we will be victorious in the long run, but the current situation is precarious even if we have found a new headquarters. Again, it is a bar, and the familiarity is nice. It's been set up differently this time. There are more doors, and it's more hostile to outsiders, but it is comforting to everyone. Tomura usually sits in one of the darkened corners, scratching or chewing on one nail. Leadership is maturing him, and that's good for the league. AFO, this is an interesting proposal, Nedzu murmured. With due respect, Principal Nedzu, it is not a proposal, Representative Imoko said with a soft smile. While it was not usual, as the instigator of the HMBH, heroes must be heroes, Bill, he had asked to be one of the people present when it came to briefing the principals of the hero schools of Japan. This is an important step to ensure the mental stability of our heroes, now and in the future. We do have checks, Hitomi Kawaguchi, the principal of CI Academy said. Do you? Representative Masami asked, her voice clearly challenging as she picked up a paper. The challenge hit her nerves. She was a first-term representative, like Imoko. She wasn't used to dealing with the principals of Japan's hero schools. Imoko seemed perfectly at ease. He'd given them a winning smile before settling. As if he did this every day. Of course he had. Not the principals but other powers in business. Imoko had dealt with them all. In that way he was far more prepared than her to be a representative. While CI's academy places a greater emphasis on knowledge than some of the other hero schools, you do not test for mental stability of your prospective students. Given that the government pays heroes, it is not unreasonable for the government and the people to know that those serving them are stable. Susumu Shimizu sighed as she flicked through the pages of the HMBH legislation. As a part of the exams delivered to all prospective hero course students, each licensed hero academy is required to administer a basic, government-issued, psychological assessment. Prospective students who failed the assessment cannot be enrolled in the heroics course. There was silence as Susumu Shimizu finished reading, though no doubt all the principals had read the legislation. That seems a bit harsh, Susumu said. Finally. On the contrary, Representative Imoko replied, it is vitally important that those who chose to train to be a hero are those who are suited for the vocation. What Imoko is saying, and what the bill addresses, Masami said placatingly, is to make sure that those who aim to become heroes are suited to it. We have seen some of the problems that come when someone licensed to become a hero is not suited to the job. Masami didn't mention anyone specifically, but these were the principals of Japan's hero academies. They'd all have particular failures from their schools. A student may be reassessed? Nedzu asked. Of course, Masami replied immediately. Ah, good, the rat human murmured. I find that our students mature greatly in their years of schooling, and while some may not be suited for hero work when they enroll, by the time they graduate, they are. Indeed, Imoko agreed amicably. The HMBH bill is not designed to exclude people from becoming heroes. It's designed to ensure those who become heroes are doing so for the right reasons. It is there to ensure their future mental stability. Imoko looked at the gathered principals. Right now Japan needs to be able to trust its heroes, he elaborated. Through no fault of you, that trust has been eroded by the actions of villains. He didn't need to specify what actions, though Imoko kept the smile from his features when many of the principals sent a glare towards Nedzu. UA had gotten off relatively lightly after most of the scandals. In the wake of the USJ incident, Principal Nedzu had managed to argue that the league could have invaded any school. The forced retirement of one student, with injuries so bad that no amount of plastic surgery would fix, and the requirement for a respirator for the rest of his life, was something that could have happened to any hero school. It ignored the fact that the league had attacked specifically because of All Might. The public was slightly forgiving then. But the scandals had continued. The death of one of their first-year students while doing field experience had been the next incident. UA had avoided most of the blame there, because the investigation had proven that the boy had disobeyed his hero mentor and thus was at fault for his own death. But in the kidnapping case, which then led to the destruction of Kamino Ward and the forced retirement of All Might, UA had not fared as well. There was a degree of resentment towards the school, not just from the other hero academies but from all of Japan. It was their security that failed to protect their student, which led to All Might's fight, and while All Might had won, everyone knew that Endeavor was a poor replacement. Unfortunately, the heroes have yet to catch the group responsible. This Imoko paused as if he was trying to recall the name League of Villains, and with All Might no longer able to be the pillar upon which society rests, other villains are coming out of the shadows, he continued. The principals knew what he was talking about. There had been a huge rise in petty crime and some were taking more violent actions. For Japan to function, people must trust their heroes, and knowing that they can trust those in training is just as important as trusting those who are already graduated. The foundation must be strong. He didn't miss the look the rat principal gave him. For a moment Imoko felt as if the rodent human could read his mind, but he had gone through worse. Nedzu's gaze had nothing on Sensei, and Sensei was missing half his face. He gave UA's principal a bland look, one that seemed to encourage argument but knew that none would be forthcoming. Yes, the foundation must be strong, UA's principal agreed. Tomura's taken a bold step. He planned it well. It was a remarkably carefully thought out plan for him. The investigation went unnoticed. The 8 Precepts didn't notice, but then we were allies. Their drug rests on very fragile foundations. A single quirk user. Tomura was pleased when Toga brought him that information. It's a simple equation. No girl, no anti-quirk bullets. They sound useful in theory, but anti-quirk bullets are a double-edged sword. They can just as easily be used against you as for you, especially if mass-produced. If the 8 Precepts were going to use them for sniper strikes, Tomura probably wouldn't have cared. The mass production just has too many risks, and even he could see that. The Yakuza are one type of villain. They are long established, and while they like to pretend they are lawless, they have their own internal rules. The League is different. We are true villains. We will do whatever it takes to get the job done. Overhaul found that out the hard way. Tomura only used the most dedicated of Vanguard Action Squad. Not those who were following in Stain's footsteps, those who were truly committed. The strike was simple and fast. Two-pronged. One for the stockpile, one for the source. Both were successful. That's not to say there isn't a few anti-quirk bullets out there. There must be, an Overhaul will be saving them for us. It means war, but the League had been at war for far longer than the 8 Precepts. They'll learn what that means soon enough, especially with Vanguard Action Squad gunning for them now. All of them. Those who pretend they follow Stain's teachings are more than willing to take out traditional bad guys. It's practically a public service, even if they are villains. The logic of some escapes me at times, but Sensei always pointed out that results matter, not the twisted logic that gets you there. Maybe that's why Tomura is beginning to understand AFO. It was odd to find the new bar mostly empty. Kirojiri was enjoying the quiet. Tomura was present, but he was silent. He'd say he was thinking, but there was only so much one could think. When Dabi appeared, it was a surprise. He was meant to be training with Vanguard Action Squad. I've got a way of taking out Endeavor, he announced, staring at Tomura. The hand-covered face shifted slightly. It was difficult to see Tomura's eyes between the fingers, but he was clearly interested. You do? Kirojiri asked for him. The fire villain didn't take his eyes off Tomura. I do, he confirmed, but it will require Kakari's support. There was silence in the bar. Kakari? Tomura asked. It was a good attempt. There was enough confusion in his tone to raise questions, to pretend he didn't know who Kakari was. It wasn't enough. Kirojiri could tell Dabi wasn't going to be distracted. The villain said nothing, but neither did he drop his eyes. A way of taking out Endeavor? Tomura eventually asked. Dabi smiled gently. Foolproof. I doubt that, Kirojiri said. Sensei liked to say that no plan was ever foolproof, not even the plans he made. The fire villain had the good taste to nod. If he's not dead, then his reputation will be ruined. Tomura scratched at his neck. And what is this plan? He'd learned to listen to plans before he's dismissed them. That was something. I never cared about All Might, Dabi said. I've always wanted to take out Endeavor. You could say Endeavor is the reason I'm a villain, Dabi continued, with a self-deprecating smile. But while this plan might kill him, I'm hoping it doesn't. Death is too quick, too easy, the destruction of his reputation, that will cause him true pain, but to do that, I need Kakari. And what do you need dear Imoko to do? Tomura asked. His question answered Dabi's unspoken question. The League did no representative Kakari. Dabi smiled. Advertise. His reputation will do the rest. It wasn't the answer Kirojiri was expecting. It wasn't the answer Tomura was expecting either. The leader of the League reached up and scratched at his neck. It will not tie back to us? He asked. Not in a way that is dangerous, Dabi admitted. Tomura reached out and tapped his fingers over the table in front of him. I think I'll let Imoko be the judge of that. Kirojiri was surprised. He didn't think Tomura would ever say something like that. It just proved that he was learning. You'll go with Toga this week and tell him. Dabi's grin widened. It was something feral AFO Izuku agreed with Dabi's plan, after a few modifications. Surprisingly, the kid also agreed that death was too good for Endeavor. He sent a note to Tomura via Toga to tell him that destroying the number one hero's reputation would do more damage in the long run. I suspect it plays into Izuku's plans, not necessarily Tomura's plans, but we are working towards the same goal, so forwarding one plan is forwarding them all. Killing Endeavor would prove to the world that the League is still there, but he'd just be replaced. He's not All Might. It wouldn't be the blow killing the former symbol of peace would have had. Tomura knows that. But destroying Endeavor's reputation, no matter how that is achieved, will rock society, and that will help our cause. Hero Society was very careful to portray All Might's reveal as a victory. He went out into retirement by taking out one of the most dangerous villains the world has ever known. They spun it as a glorious end. They had to because everyone knew Endeavor was a poor replacement. That has sown some doubt. Taking down Endeavor will sow more. And the more people doubt heroes, the better it is for us. Society relies on a certain amount of trust. People trust that their government is doing its best for them. They trust that heroes are doing their best. If that trust falters, it is a delicate balance between social order and chaos. I would say that Hero Society has become weak. It had become complacent because for a long time the balance has been towards them. It's time to shift the weight. The first indication that something happened came when the news channel broke to a new story. Around the new bar, there were several beeps from phones. The tones indicated that it was a news update rather than a text or something else. Just because they were villains didn't mean that they did not follow the news. In fact, some of them were far more informed than a regular hero about the goings-on in the world. Several of the gathered villains reached to their phone to see what the commotion was. Others started at the TV. Kirojiri caught the words breaking news as he cleaned a glass. He turned slightly and felt his eyes widen. On the screen was a picture of Endeavor, and the scrolling bar underneath was proclaiming that the villain Dabi, associated with the League of Villains, was really Tuya Todoroki, Endeavor's supposedly institutionalized son. What? Tomura demanded. Dabi wasn't present. He'd gone out earlier saying that today was the day he'd organized with Imoko. Most of the villains put their phones down as they looked at the TV. We're going to a live interview now, the announcer was saying. The view on the screen changed. Dabi was there. His blue eyes were piercing under the studio lights. His usual jacket and t-shirt had been discarded and he was dressed in a blue chanshan. It brought out his eyes and highlighted the burnt skin covering him. He looked good in it. Thank you for having me, Dabi said to the interviewer. Kirojiri vaguely recognized the woman but couldn't put a name to her face. She was an investigative reporter who usually focused on politics. She was known for her hard-hitting exposés on scandals politicians would far rather be forgotten. That explained Imoko's involvement. He'd probably been able to contact her on Dabi's behalf and then discreetly arrange the tests required to prove he was Tuya Todoroki. I guess the first thing I have to ask is the thing everyone wants to know, the woman was saying intently. You are the firstborn son of the number one hero Endeavor and his wife, but you are an acknowledged part of the League of Villains, so how did that happen? Dabi smiled and held up his hands. There was a cuff on each wrist. Quirk suppression. Had he given himself up, or was that a term of the interview? Kirojiri didn't know. Only Imoko would, but he wasn't here. It's not a nice story. Kazue. She looked sympathetic. Just take your time, she encouraged but didn't relent on the question. Dabi sighed theatrically. I guess it starts with my mother, he said with a soft smile. Kirojiri would have watched more but his phone rang. It was on silent so he felt the vibrations. He pulled it out of his misty form and looked down at the screen. The number was one didn't recognize. Cautiously he answered. Kirojiri. He recognized the voice. Imoko. Unseen Kirojiri worried one lip. Dabi's coordinates are 35, 51, 13.61, 39, 38, 27.26 at an elevation of 10.4 m. Kirojiri felt his eyes widen even as he committed the coordinates to memory. You set this up? He couldn't help the question. There was a moment of silence to his question. Death is quick, Imoko explained. This will reverberate further. Pick him up whenever you think he's said enough. The line went dead. The mist villain didn't bother to save the number. Imoko wouldn't have used any phone that could be traced to him. Instead, he looked back to the screen. Tomura was glaring at it. Kirojiri listened to what Dabi was saying. Perfect child, one with both quirks so that he could train them to defeat All Might. Defeat All Might? Kazue seemed surprised. Not in combat, Dabi was quick to reassure her. To become the next number one hero. And Endeavor was prepared to do whatever it took to get that. All you need to do is look at the birth dates of my siblings. We are all born about 5 years apart. When Fuyumi didn't show both quirks, he got my mother pregnant again with me. When I didn't have both quirks, he sired Natsuo, and when he didn't have both quirks either, Shuto, who finally has both quirks. Kazue. Matsushita did a good job of looking outraged. Kirojiri could tell the feeling was real, but at the same time he knew she would also be happy. This was one hell of a story. And how do you feel about that? Kazue asked. Once it was known I didn't have both quirks, once it was known any of us didn't have them, we were abandoned. Oh, not cut off, and not kicked out of the house. That would destroy father's oh so carefully built reputation, but he ignored us. So how do I feel about that? I feel sorry for my little brother Shuto. He's had to put up with dad's abuse for all his life. Abuse? That was a strong term. Abuse, Dabi insisted, and his eyes flashed despite the quirk suppression bracelets. What else do you call training until you can't move, until you throw up? What do you call verbal attacks, and physical attacks, all designed to try to make you into something that can take the number one hero position? Your entire life planned by him? That's why I'm meant to be in some institution. The smile Dabi gave wasn't pleasant. He gestured to himself, pulling up one sleeve to reveal that the burns went all the way up his arms. Not all of these are self-inflicted. Kazue gasped when she understood the meaning of that. He burned you? Every day until the day he decided I'd never get mother's precious ice quirk. Though I have to admit, not all of the burns are his. They are the reason I was in that institution. I wanted to get away. I wanted to get away so badly I'd take any opportunity. And thankfully for me, I have one built in. I set myself on fire. Kazue looked sick. Dabi looked detached. Fuyumi put me out and saw that I got to the hospital, but then he decided that he didn't want anything come out, so instead of coming home, I was shuttled off to the institution. He never once visited me. He never once allowed mother to visit me either. Fuyumi tried, but he controls her too. Those are some very serious allegations, but surely you know with your status, any evidence you provide would be discounted? It was a dangerous question, but it was one that spoke to the truth of the world. A villain's word, even when speaking the truth, was worth less than a hero's. Dabi chuckled. That's the beauty of it. I don't have to testify against him. With the exception of self-immolation, everything he did to me, he did to my siblings, including Shuto. I know the word of a villain isn't to be trusted, and even if I showed up to testify, I'd be arrested, but I don't need to. I've opened the door. You have the blood tests to prove that I'm Tuya Todorokian villain or not, with my 3 siblings able to corroborate the facts, that's enough. Kazue looked surprised for a moment before she nodded. She'd probably not thought of that. If your father was found guilty of things, would you give up being a villain? No, Dabi's response was instantaneous. The world has forgotten what the word hero truly means. Now it's a title assigned to any punk with a strong enough quirk, and thus, there are too few true heroes in the world. I want to change that, and to do that, the false heroes have to be weeded out. Offset. There was a noise and some shouting. The police and heroes had finally tracked down the interview site. You can't come in. Here. The shout was heard. Dabi. Dabi looked off to the side for a moment before he smiled. That's my cue. Kurogiri knew what that meant. He expanded, opened the warp gate. On the screen a swirl of darkness appeared behind Dabi, and the leader of the Vanguard Action Squad stood and stepped around the chair. Kazue just watched. At least she knew better than to interfere. Dabi nodded his head to her as a salute before he stepped into the swirling black, and it disappeared the moment a hero leapt into the shot. In the bar, all eyes turned to Kurogiri, who gestured, and the portal opened for Dabi to step through. He looked around, his eyes glittering before he bowed to them all. And that, dear League, is how you take down the #1 hero, he said happily. Rafop, it's been a few weeks since Dabi gave that interview. Tomura was angry in the aftermath. He remained angry until he saw the next pro hero ranking list. Endeavor was down to 5. The official rankings are published once a year, but updates are available every month, and there is reason to believe that Endeavor will fall further. The issue just hasn't gone away. There is a lot of speculation in public about what it means to be a hero. There is a lot of scrutiny on heroes. Every aspect of Endeavor's life has been picked at and pulled apart. I don't know if there is a case being built against him. I suspect there is. Imoko has been quiet. Tomura demanded he come to the bar, and after some wrangling he did. There was nothing really to say though. Dabi's actions fitted more into one of Imoko's plans, but politics doesn't give fast results, not like Tomura's attacks, but politics generally gives a more lasting outcome. It's a balance and both are needed. Imoko took Tomura aside and spoke to him privately for a while. It looked odd. Imoko was dressed in a suit, Tomura in his usual t-shirt. It almost looked as if a respectable father was telling off his wayward child. Yet, Tomura seemed happier after their discussion. I expect Imoko had to explain a few things to Shigaraki, but it appears to have worked. In the meantime, those sensei saved have been making another numu. A stronger one. It is nearly ready to be unleashed. Tomura radiates a sense of childish glee every time he talks about it. Now is the time to use it, with the world already reeling with the seeds of doubt already sown. Now is not the time to hold back. Rafop, what the hell is this? Representative Masami asked. She was more than exasperated. She was horrified. Proof that the system has failed, one of her colleagues answered immediately. Usually Masami wouldn't be part of such a group. She was still in her first term, but given that she had been instrumental in bringing Imoko Kakari's proposal through the party and seeing it brought into law, she was now involved in this party room meeting. They were reviewing the evidence against Endeavor, which included interviews with 3 of his children. The 4th child, Tuya, had given an all-too-public interview, but it was not considered evidence. But everything Tuya had alluded to was confirmed by Endeavor's other children, though the youngest, Shuto, had been reluctant to speak. She could understand that. This was not going to be easy for him. Maybe not failed, but it needs an overhaul, one of the others said before he fixed Masami with one eye. Do you believe Imoko might have anything ready? They could write a proposal, but why bother if an independent had already done it? It wasn't like the independent Imoko could get his policy through without their help anyway. And Imoko knew it. It was actually nice working with an independent who wasn't arrogant, though they were all waiting for something. Independents always had one issue: they refused to be pushed on. It was just a matter of finding it. Masami looked confused for a moment before she nodded. Probably, she admitted. He had that other bill ready. And the sales pitch for it, someone else grumbled. There was a moment where they wondered if they were being played. In the early days of quirks, that possibility had been guarded against. All representatives were routinely checked for signs of quirk control. Imoko could not be using any quirk on them. But it was possible he was simply playing a political game. Except, they all stuck on the fact that Imoko was independent. He simply couldn't progress further in politics unless he had a party's support. And even if he created his own party, it would just be a fringe one. It was unlikely that he could climb to the top. Is there any chance Imoko would join us? Join us? Masami asked. Join the party, came the clarification. Masami considered it. Maybe, she said slowly, but let's face it, he has his own agenda. Which is not necessarily a bad one. That was true. Public approval in the wake of the HMBH, heroes must be heroes, bill had been high. The party had benefited from implementing it. With what's come out about Endeavor, the public is calling for us to make sure that Shuto doesn't become a villain. So maybe that's the easiest thing. We extend the HMBH bill. Instead of just targeting incoming students, it should cover those already in training. It wouldn't take much to amend it, Masami admitted. Imoko's proposal had been written very carefully. But why not just extend it to cover heroes as well? She asked. Because the public isn't ready for that. A new voice broke in on their conversation. Masami looked up. Imoko, she exclaimed. The others looked slightly suspicious before Imoko smiled at them. Sorry to intrude, he said gently with a bow. Suspicion faded. It saves us from finding you, one of the older representatives said. You've read the documents? The fact that they were meant to be restricted didn't mean that much. It was a test to see if Imoko had the contacts needed. Yes. And you set up that interview, another said shrewdly. Imoko nodded, but he raised his hands. It wasn't much, he said humbly. Tuya simply needed to be heard. All I did was make sure he had the opportunity. No one believed that for a moment. Helping the villain Dabi was part of a larger ploy, but that didn't mean they couldn't also benefit from it. If I may be so bold, Imoko said before anyone said anything further, I do in fact have something further written, he announced, reaching into a bag and putting a small sheaf of papers on the table. New legislation? Amendments, Imoko clarified, his eyes fixed on Minister for Heroes. Yumiko Yamashita, who thus far had been silent. She smiled up at him, gesturing for Imoko to take a seat. I think we can work with that, Yumiko announced, picking up the papers Imoko had slid towards her. The plan was to release the latest numu against the #1 hero. There's been a hitch in that plan. It's not nice to kill someone who wants to defect after all. That means the plan has been delayed. There is debate as to if Hawk's desire is real. It would be an odd thing to have a double agent, especially given how highly ranked Hawks is, but it is not out of the question. The stakes we play for are that high. Tomura asked Imoko to find out. While Imoko is an independent representative, he has been working with the government in power to get his bills passed. He has access to those who might know the play. And if Hawks is just a play, then the league will be happy to go a few rounds. Unleashing the latest numu. High end on the #2 hero, Best Genist won't have the same effect. It was partially designed to kill Endeavor, but Dabi has taken care of that. The saga with Endeavor continues, and each month his ranking is lower and lower. It must be frustrating to him. He is still clearing incidents, but the public spectacle that is his family is dragging him down. There is talk now that his son, Shuto, is unfit to be a hero. The Hero Public Safety Commission, under direction from the government, has moved fast to implement changes to the HMBH bill. The original bill was restricted to those applying to hero courses. It now applies to those in training. Imoko was happy to relay those details via Toga. The tests haven't been administered yet, but all eyes are on Shuto. The world wants to know if he's given his standing in the UA Sports Festival and other events. Endeavor's youngest son is capable, Probably more capable than his eldest brother, but what the public wants to know is if he is suitable. I've always said it takes a certain type to become a hero, and a certain type to become a villain. The problem with the hero system is that they have never sought the types. Villainy has inbuilt checks and balances. Those not suited to it are quickly weeded out by the heroes. Those suited remain, and while some do get taken out, those of us who embrace our position, who embrace our fate, are the best. Heroes, well, they are just those who have flashy quirks. There is nothing to ensure that they are someone worth looking up to. Stain was correct in that matter, at least. Though the argument still remains that all heroes should be destroyed. The system is fundamentally flawed, and the League will prove it. AFO. Aizawa looked at his class. The 20 he had started with was no longer. While he had avoided expelling anyone on the first day, others had fallen by the wayside. Ida killed by the hero killer Stain. Mineta with injuries inflicted by that villain, the so-called leader of the League of Villains. Others had succumbed to the stress and the attacks during the year. In his more private moments, he felt some pity towards them. This had not been a normal year, but in other moments, he was thankful that they had dropped out now. It was better than they take another path rather than shatter if they made it be a hero. Now there was another hurdle in their path, yet Aizawa couldn't say he didn't agree with this one. Your enrollments for next year are pending, he told them. What? There was a variety of reactions, including some explosions from Katsuki. Aizawa ignored them. It was easier than trying to deal with it, and eventually Momo Yayorozu managed to calm the class. She wasn't the stickler for rules that Ida was, but she knew enough. They are pending, he repeated. There is new legislation that applies to all hero courses, he told them. At that, it looked like a few of them understood. That was good. Shuto, he expected. The boy's brother was practically the cause of the new legislation. Momo also looked like she knew what was going on, but she had the benefit of coming from a hero family. They would have kept her informed. Bakugo also knew, but while the kid was arrogant and abrasive, he was also good at what he did. The others didn't appear to understand, but at least they'd figure out there was no getting out of this. All hero courses across Japan had to implement the change. It just depended on if they did so at the end of the year or at the beginning, before classes started. Nedzu had decided to be a bastard and make it at the beginning of the school year, despite what everyone wanted. The rat had to know that he was frustrating many people, but maybe that was the point. Those who screamed the loudest might give them some clues. Aizawa wasn't sure what the clues would be for, but there was always something going on. Your enrollments will be dependent on you passing a mandated psychological assessment to be administered by the Hero Public Safety Bureau. Even though we aren't heroes? Uraraka asked. You have your provisional licenses, Aizawa reminded them. That was close enough. I'm sure you will all pass, and even if you fail, there is the opportunity to undergo counseling and reassessment, he added. In the event of failure, UA will automatically transfer your enrollment to the General Studies course. Katsuki took that as an insult, but he couldn't get around this. Either he took the test or he was automatically unenrolled. UA would take those who failed, but they couldn't take those who didn't have the courage to take the assessment. Some from the General Studies course were being offered the opportunity to take the assessment as well. If they passed, they'd move into the Hero course. You all have summer studies, Aizawa reminded them. I would advise you to spend at least some of that time thinking about why you want to be a hero. He knew they all had their reasons, he just hoped they were the right reasons, but he suspected there'd be at least a few who weren't with him next year. AFO. Tomura is learning that to lead, you don't need to use the resources as they come to you. You can save them for a later date. And sometimes that's best. Waiting means you can strike harder later. He's decided to keep the numu in reserve. But it doesn't suit to not strike. There is one thing about being a villain that Tomura truly understands. Unless you are one who wants to remain in the background, who wants to just survive and not change anything, you have to be seen. For a hero, that's easy. They have patrols. The public is used to seeing them. For a villain, that means you have to do something. With the number one hero's possible defection, Tomura has decided that we can take out another hero. He will capitalize on Dabi's newfound fame, even though it does mean that most of the heroes are gunning for him, and that Dabi's quirk is known. There are things that can be done. Pro-hero ranked Kamui Woods will know that the league means business. Most will think we targeted him because his quirk is weak against Dabi's, but that's what villains do. It's not like we have to fight fair. We have to do something about this so-called league. The Minister for Heroes. Yumiko Yamashita slammed her hand down on her desk as she addressed her subordinates. They were mostly public servants. They weren't elected. They didn't know what it meant to have their constituents turn against them. To have their party turn against them. Ma'am, we are doing all we can. The objection came from the head of the Hero Public Safety Bureau, which was the main department she oversaw. Are you? Yumiko asked sarcastically. We are, ma'am, came the reassurance. It sure doesn't look like it, she snapped back. They've killed hero after hero. She reminded them. It wasn't, strictly speaking, quite true, but this league had revealed all Might's weakened form and caused him to retire. They had then brought down Endeavor with the scandal that was his family, and now they had outright killed Kamui Woods, the former number 6 hero. And they'd done it on live TV, showing Dabi burning the hero alive. The station had been censored for that, but it didn't change the fact that the public had seen it. More than that, they had attacked UA several times. And what did the heroes, and by extension the government, have to show for it? Nothing. An old man locked up in Tartarus, but nothing more. The new leader, this Tomura Shigaraki, was getting stronger. He was gaining more followers and the influence of the league was spreading. The heroes weren't keeping up. We're doing all we see - no. Yumiko interrupted the platitude. You need to do more, she told them all. You need to find them and arrest them. And it needs to be soon. Every time the league made a move, the government had acted, using an independent representative's suggestions. They were good suggestions, but they had to do more. The fault lay with them and the public was quick to blame. They weren't blaming Imoko because he was the one who came up with suggestions to help regain trust, but they were blaming the government because even if they went with Imoko's suggestions, they were the ones who were letting the league run wild. We can't just ARR - Yumiko blared. You have leads? Pursue them. Nothing strong, the Commissioner General said. He was the head of police in Japan. He had dark gray hair and sharp eyes. He knew how to play both politics and his underlings. What about your plan? Yumiko questioned, glaring at the head of the Public Safety Bureau. They had come up with a stupidly reckless plan, but what good was it if it did nothing? We are still working on it. It's not like they trust him, came the response. And with his promotion, it's made it more risky. Yumiko could understand that. If it came out that the number 1 hero, Hawks, had defected to the league, it would be a disaster. It didn't matter that he was being a double agent, all the public would see was the betrayal, and that would be the end of everything. You have to do something, she reiterated. Ma'am, we really are doing all we can. Then perhaps I can help? The entire group spun in surprise. They were in a governmental meeting room. The building itself was guarded, but who was this? Yumiko looked at the man. He was tall, slender, and had dark hair with piercing eyes. His hair was swept back and he had a mask over the lower part of his face. He also had a lanyard around his neck. She saw the color of it. Green. That meant he had clearance here, but she had no idea who he was. Thankfully the others with her were just as confused, though the Commissioner General had a frown on his features, as if he was trying to recall something. And you are? She questioned. The man nodded and moved forward to take the seat at the other end of the table. It left several empty seats between him and the others. Nearest to him, He pulled something from his pocket and placed it on the table but kept his hand on it, so they couldn't see what it was. "My name is Kai Chisaki," the man said. There was no flash of recognition from anyone. "You might better know me as Overhaul," he continued. That brought recognition. Yumiko still didn't know who he was, but the Commissioner General. Did what? His spluttered question was full of denial. "The 8 precepts are meant to be destroyed." The man just quirked an eyebrow. "As if I'd let that punk destroy us." "The 8 what?" Yumiko demanded. The Commissioner General turned to the minister, aware that she shouldn't even be present in the room with this man. "The 8 precepts are a Yakuza organization," he explained. Chisaki gave him a nod. "We got into a bit of a fight with the League," he added the explanation. "So they didn't destroy you?" The Commissioner General demanded. "They like to think they have." Yumiko nodded. She could read between the lines. Politicians said the same as Yakuza, it appeared. The League had done a number on the precepts, probably destroying facilities and killing members, but they hadn't got them all. "So, I have an offer for you," Chisaki said, lifting his hand to reveal what he'd placed on the table. It appeared to be a vial, or a liquid bullet, the type some of the old movies had. Yumiko looked at it. She didn't know what it was. Again the Commissioner General gasped. As did the head of the Public Safety Bureau. "You completed it?" The question was whispered. Yumiko knew better than to demand to know immediately. Chisaki lifted his hand to his mask, pulling it off. He smiled. "We did, and I'm prepared to offer them for use against the League. Off the record, of course." Yumiko got the impression that if the Commissioner General could scramble back, he would. What was that bullet? The head of the Public Safety Bureau tore her eyes away from the bullet to look at the Commissioner General. The man was pale but saw her look. He took a deep breath before he nodded. "Off the record," he confirmed. Chisaki lifted one hand, swiping over the bullet before he put it back in his pocket as he rose. "I'll let you explain," he said, pleasantly, turning to leave. Yumiko didn't move as he left. "You'd better bloody well explain," she growled. As soon as the door closed. "And it better bloody be good," she added, glaring at the public. Servants. "This had better be darn good." Afop when Imoko requested Tomura come to dinner with Toga, I knew the League had a problem. When Tomura immediately rang me to come, and sent Toga away, I knew it was a huge problem. My mind was full of possibilities. Betrayal? The problem with that is the simple fact that everyone is a possibility then. Villain society isn't known for its loyalty, but all those in the League, those who made up the core of the League, had been tested together. They were loyal, or as loyal as anyone was going to get. I wasn't prepared for what Izuku said, though in hindsight I should have been. The 8 precepts of death. Tomura had taken action against them in the past. They'd then gone to ground. That was normal for the underworld. I assumed they'd joined another group, but apparently not. Overhaul nursed a grudge. A big one. And with his grudge and knowledge, he collected the anti-quirk bullets that had not been used. He has them all. And he's given them to the government. Which means he's given them to the heroes. Which probably means they've gone to Snipe. Or one of the other heroes with a gun quirk and good aim. Izuku looked at me. The way he did was a warning. I understand. Transport quirks are rare. Warp quirks even more so. I represent an ace for the League. If they can take me out, then the League is stuck in place. Tomura knows that as well. He doesn't like it, but he knows. I sighed. I knew what that meant. It's happened before. Not with quirk eliminating bullets, but being targeted. I don't like hiding. I don't seek the spotlight, but I don't like hiding. Especially now, when things were going so well. Izuku saw us off. He promised to get more information if he could, but he is still an independent representative. Tomura told him to change that, but Izuku shook his head. His reasoning was flawless. If he is tied to a party, he's tied to their ideals, he's tied to their fate. He doesn't want that. Tomura still ordered him to get more power. Izuku grinned at that. I don't think he needed to be told. Power is one of the things he's wanted. He assured Tomura he'd find a way. I can't see how, but I'm sure Izuku will find a way up, and we are here today with a rising star of the hero world, Lemillion. Kazue chirped happily. After her interview with the villain Dabi, she had expanded her repertoire. Interviewing heroes made for a good side gig for when political scandals were running slow. Besides, scandal tended to show up in election years. Lemillion smiled at the camera and waved cheerfully. He was everything a hero should be. Tall, well-muscled, and he had an easy smile. Some were already comparing him to All Might, though he had a long way to go before he could claim that. Still, this interview was something Japan needed. Kazue wasn't blind. She knew how much faith had been lost in heroes, and she knew what her actions had done, but the public needed the truth. Even so, she could help restore faith in true heroes. You are one of the newest graduates from UA, and you have already been working with Sir Nighteye. What's it like? Working with the only sidekick All Might had? It's interesting. Lemillion was happy to reply. Sir is such an inspiration. Kazue nodded carefully. That was such a standard reply, but this interview wasn't one that was meant to break ratings. It was meant to show that heroes were still the good guys. That's why she was interviewing the new graduates who were doing well. Does he mention All Might? Another standard question, but even with All Might's retirement, people still wanted to hear about him. He had been at the top for so long, and with the fiasco with Endeavor just not going away, it meant that people wanted the past. Kazue knew she started the Endeavor problem, but its continuing legs was the former #1 hero's fault. Who knew he's been using his position to cover up so much for so long? He may have had one of the highest case clearing rates in Japan, but he was really a terrible person. Lemillion said. I actually got to know All Might better at UA. Ah yes, he was a teacher there for your last year. Lemillion nodded. What was the biggest thing you learned off him? Oh, that's hard, Lemillion smiled as he said it. I think the most important thing I learned from All Might is that everyone can be a hero to someone, he added. All it takes is a little bit of kindness, or a smile, and that can make someone's day. Cheesy but expected, Kazue nodded her response. You've been working in the hero industry for a while now, so what is your goal? The question was a bit of a change of pace. I have my goal with my hero name, Lemillion. He tapped his chest where the number 1 million was on display. I want to save 1 million people with a smile. He told her. A lofty goal, Kazue said sagely. The hero world has changed a lot in recent years. The Hero Public Safety Board has brought in new mandatory testing for hero course applicants and for those studying. What do you think of that? It was a more dangerous question. No doubt Lemillion had already been briefed on how to hand dangerous questions. I think it's a good thing, he said without missing a beat. The new testing will go a long way to make sure that people are properly prepared to be heroes, and that where they need it, they can seek help. Heroes sometimes need help too, and the HPSB is there to help heroes just as much as it is to help everyone else. So it's a good thing, and while I know people have doubts now, I'm sure in a few years we'll look back and wonder what all the fuss was about. Yep, the kid had definitely been briefed about how to handle difficult questions, though it was a good thing. The public would feel reassured if they knew heroes were in support of the testing. And the testing was designed to help everyone. People were forgetting that. It was designed so that they didn't end up with another Dabi. It wasn't quite there to ensure they didn't get another Endeavor, but if someone was that bad, that young, then they'd be picked up. She didn't feel bad. About her part in that. No. She didn't. The public deserved to know. But the public also deserved to trust heroes, and Kazue would do her part. A fop, we lost Magna. She's not dead, but to our world, she might as well be. Quirkless and captured. She covered Tomura, so at least he'll remember her. I'm not sure if that's any comfort for her, but that's the best that can be hoped for. The question remains if Overhaul knows we know about him. The best case is that he doesn't. The worst. Well, they Overhaul and the heroes know we know about the quirk-destroying bullets. But we don't know how many they have. And they know that. It's frustrating. I estimate they have to have at least 5, but they could have more. Overhaul was good at keeping records to himself, and the League has never gone after that. At least, we can be certain that they can't make more. But that doesn't help when you don't know where they might be and how many they might have. Tomura's getting frustrated. We are all getting frustrated. That's what the government wants. Imoko hasn't been able to find out much. They don't tell independents how ongoing police operations are. They don't tell the minister either. Operational decisions are not made at that level. Though, maybe there is a way out of this. We do have options. I wonder if the bullets would work on Numu. Maybe it's time to find out. Off. Well, I can't say as I'm surprised by the results, Imoko said, putting down the paper. Masami muttered. She seemed shocked. And a third of the incoming, Imoko told her mercilessly. How does this happen? Imoko looked at Masami with an odd smile. It was one of those smiles that questioned why she was even asking. He'd known the results were going to be bad. If anything, he was pleasantly surprised that they weren't worse. I know how it happens, Masami snarked at him before she sighed. Are you coming? Coming? Imoko asked. To the meeting, she reminded him. They were in the Parliament building, though there was no official sitting today. You do realize it's a party discussion, Imoko said carefully. And he wasn't a member of her party. And he wasn't prepared for a meeting today. Not a large one, at least. He didn't have the energy. Yes, but they trust you, Masami told him. And the higher-ups want to hear any ideas you have. Imoko grinned. It was a friendly grin. Then I'll come, he said, completely ignoring how out of place it was for him to be attending a party meeting, just the way as they'd ignore it. Good, then let's go. It only took them a few minutes to get to the meeting. It was being held in the government building after all. Good, you brought him, was not the welcome Imoko was expecting. It was better than he expected because while he knew Masami trusted him and would do what he wanted, mostly, he wasn't sure about the rest of her party. To them, he was just an independent. One with some good ideas they could use. The Deputy Prime Minister, Kiyoshi Takanaka, headed up the table. This was far better than he thought. He gave the room sunny smile while assessing his reserves. He'd have to make this work. He hadn't been expecting an invitation of this type yet. I take it you've seen the results. It wasn't really a question. Imoko looked directly at the Deputy Prime Minister. I was telling Masami that I wasn't overly surprised by them. Really? There was scorn lacing the question. The man really could put a wealth of emotion into his voice. A definite skill for a politician. Imoko returned the look accompanying the question. You saw UA's sports festival last year, he replied. Specifically the first-year podium. Ah, Kiyoshi Takanaka nodded. Apparently he had seen the podium. The image of Bakugo muzzled and chained to a stake was a powerful one. So no, I'm not surprised by the results. Half the current heroes in training failed, the deputy said. And there isn't enough interested from the general courses to replace them. It's a disaster. Masami murmured. We can't let it be known, she added. Imoko didn't bother look towards her. It's going to become known, he said firmly. The legislation made sure of that, and while he could feign concern with the rest of them, inwardly he was very pleased. This was one of the best results possible, for him, and for the League. Did you know this would happen? The question was pointed. Was this your plan? That was more an accusation. Imoko cocked his head, looking at the Deputy Prime Minister. It isn't my plan, he told the room. Yet you are not surprised at the results. I'm surprised you are surprised. Imoko snapped back. He could see the game now. Really, he should have seen it from the beginning. The results were bad. 50% of those already enrolled in heroic courses failed the Hero Bureau of Public Safety's required psyche assessment. There were not enough from the general courses to replace them, and even if there was, public perception would be that those students were the substitutes, the runners-up. They weren't the best, and heroes had to be the best. Compounding the issue was that roughly a third of those who had applied to hero courses failed the assessment as well. Unless something was done, it meant in a few years, the number of heroes would drop. And Japan couldn't afford that. This is your plan. Well, it's finished. We will not stand for it. Get out. The words were huffed by Kiyoshi and he turned away partially, obviously expecting to be obeyed. No, Imoko said clearly. If he left, the government would pin the disaster on him. It was easy. He was the independent who suggested the assessments. Never mind that it was designed to ensure that a hero was really a hero. That wouldn't matter. All the government and the public would see was that they were short heroes. Well, it was time everyone woke up and realized that heroes weren't the solution. Imoko moved forward and took the empty seat at the other end of the table. He kept his eyes fixed on the Deputy Prime Minister. It's time to start dealing with reality. You of all people know the history of the last few years, you know how much has been covered up with. Imoko paused for emphasis. The room was just staring at him. They were wondering what accusation he'd make. Selective reporting, he said with a wry smile. Did they think he was stupid enough to blame the government? To blame their party? Well, he did, but now was not the time to say it. Later, when they wouldn't disagree, that was when he'd teach them that. Selective positive reporting that has highlighted the infallibility of heroes, that has highlighted their good deeds. Selective positive reporting that announced that Endeavor captured a fire starter wanted for setting fire to 3 apartment buildings, killing 20, but never mentioning that Endeavor killed 10 while trying to capture the villain. He went with Endeavor first because the man had a long history of such things. And with the new history coming out, well, he was easy to associate with hero failures. And no one ever mentioned how many All Might failed to save at Kamino. Imoko pushed. He couldn't have known that villain would be there. The objection was simple. He couldn't have, Imoko agreed, extending his reach. But isn't he paid to take precautions? Shouldn't he have retreated as soon as he knew, and come back at a different time? Or perhaps he should have left it to someone else. Let the police evacuate the citizens, and then allowed a sniper to take the villain out. The party representatives winced at his blunt assessment, but they had seen the clean-up bill. They knew other ways would have been cheaper. Get out, Kiyoshi repeated. No, Imoko stood or rather sat firm. He leaned forward, placing his elbows on the table as he rested his chin on his hands. You can have your little temper tantrum later, he told the room, ignoring the gasps. The Deputy Prime Minister looked back at him, face livid with rage, but Imoko simply stared at him, daring him to object. Kiyoshi's mouth opened and closed a few times before it snapped shut. Imoko already knew that everything he'd thought to say had been countered. It was the way these things worked. This is a problem that has been building for years, and now it is time that it was dealt with once and for all. You can take the easy path, which will be to just scrap the assessments, or you can take the right path and ensure that those who are awarded the accolade of hero are truly heroes. Imoko moved his eyes around the room, meeting the gaze of all the representatives here. It gathered them to him, but it was tiring. He knew what they wanted to do. They wanted to scrap the assessments. To say that while the assessments were good, those who failed would be allowed to continue so long as they got counseling. But that wasn't the path Imoko wanted, and he wasn't here to allow the government the easy path. He was here to ensure his plans succeeded, and that required the assessments, and it required them to be public. It also required the assessments to apply to heroes, which they currently didn't. Every eye in the room was on him. It was a good thing this was a private meeting, or it would look odd. It looked like Imoko, the independent, first-time elected representative, was the one in control, not Deputy Prime Minister Kiyoshi Takanaka. "All you have to do is trust me," Imoko said. "It will be difficult, I'm not saying that it won't be, but now is the time to hold firm, and you have that time," he added with a smile. Sensei had always said in politics, and in business you couldn't just demand something, you had to offer something in return. It was a valuable lesson. It's 3 years until the next election, that means the current crop of heroes will be hitting the streets. That means the benefits of the changes will be seen. It's going to be a difficult few years, Imoko allowed with what seemed to be a sad smile. In reality it was smug. Difficult only began to describe it. Tomura would be doing everything in his power to take down the heroes, and if Tomura did it well, people would be actively trying not to be heroes. But that's what happens when you become complacent. There is no question that All Might was a true hero, but everyone forgot, that he is also a man. He couldn't be everywhere at once, and he was going to retire. We got lucky with him, but we can no longer just sit on the sidelines and leave everything to one man. We all forgot that we have a responsibility to create a brighter future, a safer future. We can't rely on one man. So now, it will be difficult. But the benefits will outweigh the pain. We are already allowing heroes to use lethal force. How much better will it be when they won't, because that goes against their ethos, but they still get the job done? How much stronger will faith in heroes be? Not all the heroes are endeavor, but the way the system was going, they would be. What you have to do now is nurture those who will be heroes for the right reasons, and to do that, and all you have to do is hold firm, until the next election, Imoko finished. Kiyoshi nodded, though he didn't look pleased. Imoko could live with that. It wasn't a pleasing thing. He didn't have to be pleased, none of them did, they just had to do it, and that would please him, which really was the point. "No, we have to go further," Kiyoshi said slowly. "The assessment will weed out those who could be the next endeavor, and while it is good, we don't know what nightmares are awaiting us in the existing hero ranks. We need to weed out those who are unworthy," someone else agreed. Imoko smiled. That's exactly what they needed to do. He rose, being careful to remain quiet as the government representatives talked, and walked to the door. He let himself out. Once in the corridor, Imoko braced himself against the wall but couldn't hold himself upright as his legs trembled. He slid down so that he was sitting on the floor, breathing heavily. His eyes blurred. "Sir, are you all right?" The noise wasn't welcome, but Imoko recognized the uniform of one of the security officers who worked in the building. He dragged in air, forcing his head up. He couldn't afford to be taken to hospital now. It would raise too many questions. "I'm fine," he managed to say. The guard didn't buy it. "I just need to eat," Imoko told him. "Can you help me to the cafeteria?" It wasn't far, and once he got some food, he'd be okay. Tomorrow, after sleeping, he'd be fine. "Are you sure, sir?" the guard asked politely. He no doubt recognized the ribbon rose Imoko had on his suit. It was the badge all representatives wore. "Positive," Imoko said, lifting one hand. The guard helped him stand. "It's going to be okay," Imoko told the guard as he walked away from the meeting. It really was going to be okay, and now all he had to do was wait. At least until it was time for phase 2 of his plans. There is a certain thrill with overkill. As a villain, it is bad practice, but I often forget how young those of the League truly are. With everything that has happened, and the threat of quirk nullification bullets being aimed specifically at us, it was good that they got to have some fun. It let off some steam. I could see the way everyone was relaxed when they returned from the raid. Tomura was even in a good mood. I saw why when the numu high-end returned. That numu is really a crowning achievement. It's loyal not just because it was ordered to be but because it wants to be. It was carrying something when it emerged from my warp gate, something it set down carefully on the bar. It was some sort of safe. Tomura opened it with his usual finesse by disintegrating the door. Quirk nullification bullets were inside. I'm told it is almost the entire stock, but no one saw Overhaul. They were being stored in a government building. Apparently UA wasn't considered safe enough, which makes sense. It is a school. It has good security and the actions of the League have ensured that security there is tight and robust, but it is still a school. You do not store things that villains might be after in a school. The government building made sense. Tomura is happy we have them. The best course would be to destroy them, but he wants to keep them. I understand. They are a resource, but they are a dangerous resource. We don't have a sniper at present, though apparently Tomura has a plan for that. He hasn't said anything. But I know the look he gave me. I'm not going to like it. At the moment, if he plans to use them, the question must be who to use them on. Hawks, who still apparently wishes to join us. Best Genist, Ed Shot? Any of the heroes in the ranks, or someone else? Maybe a newer hero, Lemillion? He's making a name for himself and is rather like All Might. Someone in training? Though Imoko has given assurances via Toga that he's already taken care of some of the more dangerous possibilities. Tomura demanded a further explanation and will accompany Toga next week. Apparently he hasn't been watching the news. There were times when Kazue Matsushita thought that she would be remembered for destroying Hero Society. Then she told herself to be reasonable. She had done one interview with one villain to expose one supposed hero. It was the same as the exposes she did on politicians, and the public deserved to know the truth about the people serving them. It wasn't her fault that things had spiraled out of control. And she was doing her best to help regain any control. She was interviewing the new heroes, and today she had quite an old hero, comparatively speaking. The number one hero, Hawks. Hopefully he'd be able to put some perspective on things. And we are back in 3, 2 dash, the last number was silent and Kazue plastered a smile on her face as the cameras refocused. Hawks did the same, ruffling his feathers artistically. It was a good shot. Today I'm speaking with someone who needs no introduction. Kazue said happily, gesturing towards the pro hero. The number one pro hero in Japan, Hawks. He stretched out one wing as he gave a sunny smile. So, Kazue said, your rise to the number one spot has been pretty quick. It was a nice open statement. He grinned at her. It has, and in some ways, I feel a bit cheated. Cheated? She inquired. Yes. I always admired Endeavor when I was a child. The hero Endeavor, not anything else, Hawks clarified, quickly raising one finger to forestall objections. I liked the way he never gave up on being number one. A tough position, Kazue agreed. And it's only now that we're really talking about it. Everyone else was just happy All Might was there. They left a lot of things to him. No one was trying to take his place. Except Endeavor. I admired that. I admired the drive, the dedication, the will to do better. It's that which I think makes a hero. An interesting take, Kazue said. At the moment though the public isn't too happy with the Hero Public Safety Bureau. Hawks shook his head. There was a soft smile on his features. I don't know why. Everyone is focusing on the failures, instead of seeing the success. Instead of saying that 50% of those enrolled failed, why don't we say that 50% passed? Interestingly, the assessment has shut up all those people saying that Endeavor's youngest son was just going to follow in his big brother's footsteps. It must have been a big step for Shudo to release that information, but I admit it's been effective. In general, the assessments have been a good thing, though I do think they are administered early, but since there is the opportunity to be reassessed, I think it can be dealt with. You think it's administered too early? Of course. Are you the same person now as you were when you were 14, or 15, or 16? Again Hawks shook his head, ruffling his feathers. The answer is no. So I think what we are seeing is the assessment picking up those who just aren't quite ready to be heroes, which given that they are in training, I think that's fair. He grinned again. Kazue nodded her agreement. That was a reasonable assessment and she was sure that others would see it that way. Besides, this is another way of getting different people into heroics. You don't like the schools? Not at all, though, as you know I didn't go to UA. I have nothing against UA, their results speak for themselves, but I think the system could be a little more open. Currently it's so closed, and if it was open, then the public could see in a bit more, they can trust more, and the assessments are one way of doing that. But how will they open the system and allow different people into heroics? Kazue asked, sounding genuinely confused. Because, with the assessments came a rule change, Hawk said expansively, waving his wings. If you pass the assessment and can get a traineeship at a registered hero agency, then you can be a hero too. Wow, really? Kazue's eyes widened. She hadn't seen that part of the rules. Really? And it's a good thing. Though I think people do need to be aware of what they are getting into if they go that route. It means that someone who wasn't ready to be a hero when they were younger can apply later. And still do it. I think that will make the system a lot more robust, though I don't think there's any trainee registered agencies yet. I'm sure there will be. That is a big change. Kazue agreed. It will be, but the agencies have to embrace it, so we will see. I think in a few years, it will be normal. So people shouldn't start applying just yet. Not yet. Until then though, I'm still aiming for a world where heroes can enjoy a bit of boredom, he said happily. Kazue chuckled. That particular statement was becoming very much associated with the number one hero, but in a good way. It meant that there wouldn't be villains, though she quickly sobered. You aren't concerned about the calls that say that most villains are actually common criminals, and that we don't need heroes to deal with them? Hawks shook his head. It is true, and we overlook the great work the police are doing, he said. But saying that all villains are just petty thieves or common criminals is generalizing far too much. It forgets that there are still those out there who are truly worthy of the title villain. The League still exists and we know they are still working towards some sort of goal. That was true. The news had been full of reports that the League had been seen stealing something highly classified from a government building. Everyone was being tight-lipped on exactly what had been stolen. They are Kazue stopped at the beeping that was coming from Hawks. She couldn't glare, but they had asked him to make sure his phone was off for the interview. That's not the hero pulled out a small device. It was too small to be a phone, but he stared at it intently. There's been a call for all heroes in the area, Hawks announced with a smile. Time for work, he added, flapping his wings and quickly disappearing into the dark that was the rest of the studio. Kazue looked at the spot he had been sitting. Well, she smiled at the camera, that was the hero Hawks. And you can see, a hero's work is never done. I took Tomura to the weekly meeting with Toga. We waited in the lounge of the apartment for Toga before Izuku arrived. Toga came in her usual disguise of Imoko's mother. She gave Tomura a nod, knowing he'd be here, and then started making several phone calls. I had forgotten how much Izuku could eat. Toga seemed to be quite used to it. She ordered extra for us. It was nice not to cook. Though we weren't there for dinner. Izuku had news for us. Good news, for once. He knew where Overhaul was. Tomura wasn't that Interested until Izuku reminded him that even if the man lacked the means at the moment, he knew how to make quirk-destroying bullets. There was no reason he couldn't try with a different quirk. Something like the Pro Hero Eraserhead's quirk, for example, might be able to be mutated into a bullet form. Izuku also reminded Tomura that it was Overhaul who'd given the quirk-destroying bullets to the government, and now they knew it was possible. It was now a military thing. It's not that I believe Tomura had forgotten about Overhaul, I believe he just hasn't assigned him an appropriate threat ranking. Imoko had a suggestion for how to deal with the problem. Hit him with one of his own anti-quirk bullets. Tomura liked it. The notion appealed to his twisted sense of humor, though Izuku was quick to encourage Tomura to kill Overhaul after removing his quirk. Quirk removal, after all, does not remove knowledge. I can see the beauty of using his weapons against him. There is a certain amount of irony there. It would be justice. Though killing him seems a waste after removing his quirk, we are unlikely to get the chance to kill him if he has his quirk. Tomura asked about some of the up-and-coming heroes, Lemillion especially. Izuku didn't know anything much about that one. The boy had graduated from UA, with a quirk mutation appearing in his last year, granting him incredible strength. He was working for Nighteye Agency, which was only notable as it was run by the only sidekick All Might ever had. That information was enough to garner Tomura's interest. Any link to All Might was enough to get his interest. While the League could take out All Might now, there was little point. The world wouldn't fear a group who had to attack a man whose quirk was gone. We would be seen as weak. Tomura didn't like that, but he accepted it. But Sir Nighteye, and all the heroes of his agency, those were fair game. We could take them out, and Tomura had been looking for something to do recently. Though Imoko hadn't asked for Tomura to be there, just to tell him about Overhaul, or to give what little information he had about other heroes. His information gathering within the government had been going well. More importantly, he was maintaining his position easily. I checked the polls after our visit. For an independent representative, Imoko was very popular. He had the highest approval rating of any of the representatives. Sensei had indeed chosen well. Imoko told us there was some sort of big operation within the Hero Public Safety Bureau. It wasn't unusual for there to be a big operation. What made this one special is that it was to deal with us. The League. Tomura was happy about that. Apparently we are big enough that even the government is against us, not just their heroic agents. Imoko warned us to be careful. He didn't know what the operation involved and he wasn't even meant to know it existed, but that's never stopped a villain. He would tell us more if he could. Even with his happiness, Tomura agreed to be careful. After all, if the League fell to just this, then history would just remember us as another bunch of villains, not those who changed the world. We weren't going to fail, a fop ragdoll. Or would you prefer if I call you Tomoko? The question was soft. Tomoko, came the answer. It sounded dejected. I'm sorry, Representative Kakari, an apology followed. I just don't know why you asked to meet with me. Please, call me Imoko. Representative Kakari makes me feel old. The statement was accompanied by a laugh. I still don't know why you asked to meet with me. Imoko nodded. I'll be honest, it's because of what happened to you. Humph. So you want to meet the freak? She hissed, but there was no passion to it. Her voice was tired. No, why would I think that? Imoko challenged. I'm quirkless. Yes, he agreed, nodding. That doesn't change who you are though, does it? Imoko questioned. He crossed his hands in front of him. I'm sure when you became a hero, you envisaged many outcomes. A realistic hero will consider the good outcomes and the bad. Death is obviously one of the bad outcomes. Incapacitation somehow, another, but I doubt any hero would ever have thought about losing their quirk, especially a hero who saved so many people. She glared at him. It was half-hearted as best. So you did come to look at the freak? No, I came to offer you a job, Imoko countered. The glare took on a confused aspect. I came to offer all the wild pussycats a job, Imoko added. You're lying. Imoko gave her a hard look. He had allowed a certain amount of casualness in their discussion, but there was a limit. He was an elected representative of the people, that meant he was due some respect. I'm sorry, Representative, Tomoko apologized. I understand it is unexpected, Imoko waved away the apology graciously. I'm sure that you are aware that as a group the Pussycats' ranking has dropped. That was putting it mildly. The fall in their ranking was comparable to Endeavor's. They had gone from rank 32 to 411. It was to be expected. And I'm sure your teammates will be able to regain their standing. He told her. But I won't. But you won't, Imoko agreed. It might be cruel, but it was reality. Ragdoll's quirk was gone and Sensei wasn't going to give it back anytime soon. That's why I want to offer you all an alternative, or just to you if the others want to continue. Tomoko was silent for a few moments. Imoko could tell she was thinking. She sighed heavily. What is it? She was obviously expecting it to be some sort of work to help him. Even without your quirk you can help people, Imoko told her. You can save people, he added for good measure. He had a soft smile. It covered the snarl he wanted to express from the similar memory he had of words like this. He wondered if All Might even remembered them? I can't do anything. I can't feel them anymore, she objected. So you are saying your quirk is the only way you can do your job? Imoko stated. I must have a problem in my office then, he continued, since the only office staff I employ are quirkless. I hate to think of the state of my paperwork if quirks are the only way to get things done. He mocked. It's not the same. I can't feel them anymore, Tomoko repeated. Her eyes flashed. If I can't feel them, I can't tell the others where they are. Imoko snorted. That is true, but you can still save people without a quirk. How? She demanded, disbelief liberally coating her voice. By joining the rescue services as a dispatch officer, Imoko told her. You have skills beyond your quirk, and defining yourself only by what your quirk allowed you to do is limiting. I know you can move beyond this. I know you can do better, and I want to give you that chance. Rescue services? Tomoko seemed confused. The people you've worked alongside in large disasters, Imoko reminded her. Heroes were so quick to forget. Sometimes disasters were so large that heroes couldn't get everyone. Then rescue services did the work. And even more. Generally, it wasn't like the police were just waiting for a hero to arrest someone for them. Heroes forgot there was a whole support structure that did the grunt work that kept them looking good. They need dispatchers, and I suspect, with your ability to keep track of things, you'd be one of their best. But I can't keep track of things. Tomoko objected. Of course you can, Imoko said. Your quirk helped, but he tapped his head, you also have to have been smart enough to keep up. So you can do it without your quirk. Maybe it won't be as easy, but you can do it. You can still save people. Her yellow eyes looked at him. Imoko kept his expression encouraging. She blinked at him and he heard her breath exhale. Just me? Imoko understood. All the wild pussycats if you, and they want, he repeated what he had said earlier. It would be a better statement if they all came, but if he could even get one, then that would also work. I'll ask, Tomoko told him. Imoko smiled. He had her a fop. It's been relatively quiet lately. That is a bad thing. People get slack. People have been slack, which is why once again we are now stuck in a single room. The league's core numbers haven't gone up recently, but we have gained more associates. Those who form part of the action squad have those they order on behalf of the league. That means that at least we all fit into the room. It's just one of many retreat points we have. Tomura learned enough to set them up in advance. Once we figure out what happened, and know the extent of any compromise, we will move to one of our backup locations. But it brings back unpleasant memories. And we lost the numu in our escape. It is the reason we managed to escape, but it is still a loss. Tomura is raging. He's doing it silently, but the main thing to figure out is what to do next, and of course, who betrayed us. I suspect it was no one. I suspect it was simple comfort, that too many of us were seen coming and going from the bar. As I said, quiet leads to complacency. I suppose I should be thankful that it means no one betrayed us. And the one thing I can say for sure is that we managed to take the anti-quirk bullets with us. If that was the point of the raid, then we still have them. That is our victory, even with the loss of the numu. I expect any plan to take out Overhaul will be superseded now. We have to strike back, we have to do something to show that the League is still there. It is our obligation and our right as the League. It is expected, and I know Tomura is planning it. He has come a long way, just the way Sensei wanted. They've both come a long way. AFO, it's an ambush. Mirio screamed into his comb, even as he phased. It's the League. He managed to get out before the device fell off him. He recognized the black warp gate several had emerged from. He sank into the ground as several shots impacted where he had been. Fire, Mirio recognized. That meant Dabi was there, and it probably meant the little girl who had needed help was Himiko Toga. Mirio controlled himself and went forward, estimating where the girl might be. All the League had been implicated in many jobs. Kurogiri was there. Transport, but Himiko was their spy. If he could take out any of the League, then it would a good thing. We are on our way. The voice came from his comb, shockingly loud to make sure he heard. There would be no other information given, since the agency knew his calm would no longer be hissed. But that gave the villains notice that they had a time limit. Mirio burst from the ground. He'd timed it right and was rewarded with the wide eyes of Himiko. He swung one arm, letting his quirk fade. She saw it and reacted, but she was too slow and Mirio's fist hit her temple. Himiko collapsed into a heap. This was meant to be a routine patrol. That's why he, a sidekick, was out on his own. Sir Nighteye knew he could be trusted from his internship. He phased again as another ball of fire lanced through his position. And was that gas? That changed the priorities. Before he fell back into the ground, Mirio looked around. He could see members of the League everywhere, including one covered in hands. Tomura Shigaraki was here. But he couldn't see the mustard. Not every hero had memorized who was in the League and their abilities, but Mirio had a stake in that. With All Might being his mentor, and more than that. With him carrying on the legacy of One for All, he felt obligated to destroy the organization All for One had made. All Might had taken out the leader, Mirio now had to take out the rest. Still phased, he powered up One for All, readying a punch, and then he pushed up, emerging from the ground. He smiled as he realized he was on target behind Muscular. He hit the large villain as hard as he could. Usually he would have held back, or tried with his own strength, but he knew how strong this villain was. The man staggered and tried to hit him, but Mirio was already gone. One for All was still new to him. He had the strength, but he was working on integrating it into his fighting style. It was hard work, but it would be worth it. That's why he was with Sir Nighteye's agency still. The man knew All Might and knew how to help. He heard the call gas. Masks, and assumed the League would be donning them. The call though gave him a better location for mustard and he moved towards it. Practice meant he could hold his breath while phased, but he still needed to breath when he came up, and that meant he couldn't have the area covered by gas. He leaped up in front of where he estimated the villain to be, already swinging. Except it wasn't mustard. Mirio felt his eyes widen even as he swung. The other villain obviously knew what he was thinking because he grinned right before he collapsed. But the damage was done. Mirio took a breath. It was bad. He could taste the gas, but he gritted his teeth. It wouldn't be enough to stop him. He grunted with effort as he swung around, not phasing and using the time to properly assess the situation. The agency would be here soon. He just had to hold on for it more. Miro saw Dabi. The villain was on the ground and smirking at him. At least Mirio thought it was a smirk. With the facial burns, it was hard to tell. Mustard was actually near Toga, putting a mask on her face. Muscular was glaring at him, and looking down at him from a balcony was Tomura. Behind him was Kurogiri. It was most of the league. At least, the ones who were powerful. Before he had to take another breath, Mirio phased again. Just in time. He caught sight of a small warp gate right in front of him, and he felt something pass through him before he sank into the ground. He knew where Mustard was now, and even if he couldn't take out that villain, he could get one of the masks. Mirio re-emerged where he knew Mustard would be. The other villain apparently knew that's what he'd do, because Mustard tried to put up a defense. It didn't work and he dropped. Mirio was happy about that and grabbed at a mask. He'd have to figure out what went through him later. For now he needed that mask. The air he breathed through it wasn't fresh. It was hot and tepid, but it was clean. That was good. He glared at the league. They still seemed confident. There was no reason for them not to be, but Mirio couldn't help a smile when he heard the noise of the agency arriving. More pests, Tomura growled, and Mirio saw the gun in his hands. That explained what had passed through him. They tried to shoot him, though this was a new thing for the league. Tomura didn't usually use a weapon. The hand-covered villain glared at the newly arrived heroes. Mirio stood still as several warp gates opened over those who were unconscious. They passed over their forms before disappearing. Darn it! They really had to take out Kurogiri. Thankfully, the others recognized that. The agency had trained together for years. They knew how to work together. Instead of gas masks, Mirio was amused to see that they all had bubbles over their heads, no doubt giving them fresh air to breathe. What surprised him though was that Sir Nighteye was there. With his quirk he didn't always enter combat, then Mirio knew he was being stupid. The League was here. The same league that had taken out the 8 Precepts of Death and the same league that was terrorizing Japan. Somehow, Mirio could see the smirk adorning Tomura's face, even with the obscuring hands. The man held up something. Mirio didn't know what it was, but from the way Sir Nighteye stiffened he did. Wait, obscuring hands, not an obscuring gas mask. There was no gas up there. He hauled the tepid air into his lungs and phased. The mask clattered to the ground, but Mirio didn't hear that. Instead he was moving to the building Tomura was in. There was only Kurogiri and the league's leader there. Kurogiri had a fatal weakness. Even the first years, they were now second years, had worked that out. And so long as Tomura didn't touch him with all 5 fingers, then he was just a regular man. This would be the end of the league. Mirio leapt from the ground. By his reckoning, he'd be slightly behind the 2 villains when he emerged. It wouldn't be easy, but it would be doable. There was a flash of white and a loud noise. The villains didn't wear white. Then as Mirio materialized, something crashed into him. It was Sir. There was red against his back. TCH. Mirio recognized Shigaraki's voice. That was the last bullet, he said. Get back, Sir Nighteye said, pushing himself free of Mirio's hold. What, sir? Get back, came the order again. It didn't help that Mirio could see the red stain getting bigger. His eyes fixed on it. He could barely see anything else. He couldn't hear anything either. There was a rushing in his ears that was odd given everything else. Let's go, Kurogiri, Shigaraki said. No! Mirio cried as he realized what had happened. Sir had. Kurogiri said nothing and Mirio could only watch as the warp gate opened and the 2 villains disappeared. Sir Nighteye stumbled forward. Mirio caught him. "Sir!" he cried. He couldn't do anything as the man fell. "No, please, sir." "I'll be fine," Sir Nighteye said. Mirio didn't believe him, not with the stain that large. He could now hear the others rushing to their position. "You have to watch for the hidden, Mirio," Sir Nighteye said. "You have to watch for the hidden one." "No, sir." The others burst onto the balcony and Mirio allowed himself to be pushed away as Centipeder started first aid. God, what had he done? Tomura was initially angry to learn that we hadn't killed Sir Nighteye. He had been aiming at Lemillion, using my warp gate to ensure the bullet hit close. However, a few hours online made Tomura much happier. The League hadn't killed Sir Nighteye, we'd done something better. We'd removed his quirk. True, we wanted to remove Lemillion's quirk, but taking out All Might's sidekick is a good consolation prize. Especially the removal of his quirk. When Sensei removed Ragdoll's quirk, the heroes kept it quiet. It wasn't that hard with 3 other members of the team. The public knew something had happened. The Wild Pussycats dropped dramatically in the rankings, but that could have been due to simple injury. Thus, there's really only been rumors that quirk removal was possible. The League proved it. And the League was feared for it. Ironic that it is Overhaul's legacy we are credited with. Theoretically, removing Lemillion's quirk would have had the same effect. In practice, I think it wouldn't have hit as hard. Sir Nighteye is more known in the industry, has garnered more respect. Lemillion is new and it would possibly been written off as just another loss. The only frustration Tomura had with the affair was how easily some members were defeated. Toga will have to train. As will Mustard. We need some fresh blood because our abilities are too well known. Jiren has been quiet lately. He's still shipping supplies, but he has to be circumspect. The hero community isn't stupid. They have to know he's connected to us some way. It means though, if we want to take out Overhaul, either they are going to have to be better, or we need more resources. The next numu isn't ready yet. They can't be made as fast as they used to be. Tomura is frustrated about that, and with the loss of high-end, even if that was the reason we avoided capture, it means one of our best numus is gone. We still have enough bullets. Tomura hasn't been wasteful with them, despite the missed shot at Lemillion. I think Tomura will save one for Overhaul, though Izuku has requested 2. He assures us it's for the businesses, not the government, which means he probably wants to duplicate them. I don't like the idea, but I think Tomura does. The concept of being able to get more, especially with the fallout from Sir Nighteye, is attractive. Dabi continues to meet with Hawks, who after this last incident appears to be more than eager to change sides. He's given us some information. Nothing very dangerous yet. Tidbits. He knows they are, and he knows we will check their veracity. It will be a devastating blow to lose another number 1 hero, especially since there is no heroic way to spin defection. We need more resources, though Izuku is already giving us everything he can. The businesses Sensei left are profitable and that profit goes to us. But even so, it's a large war, one we have to continue to fight and one where both sides lose. We kill the heroes and they. Perhaps there is a way to get what we want up. I think as a nation, as a world we should be ashamed. Nedzu listened to the speech. It was being given live and while he was not human, he appreciated good oration when he heard it. Imoko Kakari was a first-term representative but he was a very good speaker. The man-rat knew he was going to go far, despite Imoko's status as an independent. Nedzu could tell. And that worried him. We have forgotten where we came from. We refuse to look back because we are afraid. And in that fear, we are lashing out at those who remind us of that past. How else can you explain an 80% difference in suicide rates, not just in Japan, but globally, between those of us blessed with a quirk and those who were born normal, without a quirk? There was something. He'd only met Imoko Kakari once. The man had been affable, pleasant, even when giving the news of the new assessments. He had been genuinely caring, just as he was now. 80% more. Kakari was reinforcing his point. Do we think we can just ignore it, that it will go away? Of course not. We forget that not so very long ago, we were all quirkless. We don't like to hear it, we don't like to know it, and we ignore that 20% of the population born today is not blessed with a quirk. Instead, we persecute these people. We bully and belittle them. We try to pretend they don't exist. Imoko paused at that announcement. Nedzu nodded slightly. This was a political speech given at a press conference, and like all political speeches, there would be fact-checking done on it, available to the public. UA's principal already knew Kakari's facts would be true. The politician was one of those who preferred to rely on truth rather than easily disproved lies. Such an earnest politician should be celebrated, but perhaps that was the problem. Japan has a long history of ignoring what it does not like. Have we already forgotten our shame? Have we forgotten how insular we were? How we called those of mixed race not Japanese? We made a mockery of ourselves then. We forgot that there is no mixed race, there is only one race on this planet, human. But we were content to draw shallow definitions. We were content to push the issue aside, ignoring the pain it caused. Are we once again content that if it is not public, if it does not affect us, there is no shame? That forgets that an absence of shame is not the presence of honor. It forgets that ignorance, that deliberate dismissal, is the very definition of dishonor. Shoyuta, Nedzu said to the other in his office. What do you think? Class 2A's. Homeroom teacher looked at the TV, his eyes focused on the politician who was speaking. He makes a good speech. Nedzu knew he shouldn't have expected much more. He gave the imitation of a smile. He does, the principal agreed. Aizawa couldn't keep up with his intellect, but he was smart enough not to make himself appear dumb. You've never thought about him? Those who are quirkless, we consider beneath us. We don't notice when they disappear. We just look away. But we know where they are going. We've always known, we just choose not to know. We choose to look away as those who are quirkless are pushed to the edges of society, are bullied, belittled, and discriminated against. We feel as if we do nothing wrong when they are turned away. We feel as if we can because they are somehow lesser. Not really, Shoyuta replied. Nedzu looked at the pro-hero. Perhaps you should, he suggested. On the screen he could see the way several reporters were looking down at their phones. No doubt they were already checking Imoko's words. From the distasteful expressions the principal could see, the reporters weren't liking what they found, but since they hadn't interrupted, the Ratman already knew the reporters hadn't caught Kakari in a lie. Those we deem quirkless, and even those with quirks deemed useless, gather in our slums and our ghettos. They have no other choice. Why? Are they less human? No. It is proof that our society has become skewed. Too often do we blindly worship those with strong quirks, and ignore others. Too often do we focus on that one aspect, the quirk, ignoring the man beneath. The politician didn't name anyone, but Nedzu was confident that even the most dense would understand the reference to endeavor. Aizawa must have thought so too as he glared at the screen. Endeavor was still causing Heroes problems, even after the Hero Public Safety Bureau delisted him. The court cases were dragging on. Not as sensational as they had been, but a constant grind, a constant mark against the work heroes were doing. We have forgotten compassion, and I will change that. As an elected representative of the people, all people, I am going to instigate a policy in my offices to try to counteract the injustices being done, to try to bring some balance back to the world. Where there are two applicants for a job, both equally qualified, no more will I allow discrimination against one who is quirkless. I will hire only quirkless people because I know that they are people too, and I will treat them as the humans, with dignity and compassion that they have the right to. Perhaps I should, Shoyuta agreed, as Imoko opened the floor to questions. There was a barrage of noise as all the reporters cried out for attention. Imoko picked one and the others silenced. Is that for your political offices or your business interests? Nedzu nodded at the question. It was a very good one. Imoko Kakari had come to the public's attention as a director of quite a few businesses. The type of business that just ran and didn't cause problems. Very quickly though he'd moved into politics. As far as I can, all of my offices, Imoko replied. With a smile. There are a few positions in my various companies that benefit from specific quirks, so those will still be hired out. I view the quirk then as part of the qualification for the job unfortunately, but most jobs do not require the use of quirks, and I believe we have forgotten that in society's almost single-minded focus on them. UA's principal saw the way Aizawa's eyes narrowed. The lower part of the pro-hero's face was covered in his capture weapon, but the gesture meant he'd probably resisted the urge to snort. On screen Imoko gestured for another question. Is this part of any new legislation you want to get through? Another pointed question. Nedzu could see the way Shoyuta was becoming interested, but the underground hero wasn't known for his optimism. If something, or someone, looked too good to be true, then it usually was. Aizawa had made his hero career looking into such things. Imoko gave a pleased smile at the question. Actually, it is, he said firmly. I haven't quite got it written yet, because there have been more immediate issues, but I do want to introduce legislation to the parliament that will make it illegal to discriminate against anyone on the basis of their quirk. We seem to have forgotten that quirk or not, humans are humans, and we all have the same basic rights. I find it sad that such a thing might need to be legislated, but if that's what it takes, then that is what I will fight for. He's good, Aizawa murmured. Even with his intellect it took a moment for Nedzu to realize what Shoyuta meant. Imoko Kakari's words were good, but so was his acting. Inwardly Nedzu was pleased. If the underground pro-hero was thinking that, he'd go the extra in investigating, and the principal felt that to learn anything of note about Kakari, it was going to require a plus-ultra attitude. AFO, the facility where they are holding the numus, thankfully is in Tartarus. But it isn't going to be easy to break into either. Dabi asked Hawks to confirm which numus were incarcerated. I think he was pleased to learn that his numu was still alive. As is the original numu created to kill All Might at the USJ. That news pleased Tomura. I managed to remind him that we shouldn't retrieve any numu that wasn't conditioned to obey one of us. Sensei did have a few that obeyed only him. Tomura listened but dismissed my concerns. Those numu captured have been those who obey him. He is not concerned. I just hope there aren't any extras. My reasoning is convoluted, but perhaps I am reading too much into the circumstance. I am not convinced that Hawks truly wishes to defect. If he truly did wish to defect, he could simply go on a rampage and join us. That would send an appropriate message. He has not. Instead, he remains the #1 hero. It is good to give us information, but thus far he has yet to give us anything truly useful. Confirming the numus is useful but can be a double-edged sword. He has confirmed the numus we know about. There may be others. I do not believe Dabi has asked, thus if we go and find there are others, it could be we who are attacked by them. Maybe it is a pointless worry, but I do not like the game Tomura is playing with the hero. There is too much that can go wrong. It is not an election year, but Imoko is giving speeches as if it is. The public is listening. That's a good thing for us. I think. Tomura actually cackled when he saw the opinion polls. As a villain he doesn't have to pay attention to them. There is, after all, no ranking for villains, but he does understand that Imoko needs them to be positive. Toga looked happy as well. She seems to enjoy her weekly visit to Imoko, and I assume she is proud of him. It is rather odd. She is as vicious as always, and quick with her knives, but she does have a soft spot for Imoko. It is good. It means her act as his mother will be better. One thing has bothered me recently though, even with Imoko's success. He has gotten in contact with his real mother. The woman doesn't know it, but Imoko is using his own missing persons case. He is very eloquent about it, but I was still surprised to see her standing there. He pointed out the differences in the way his case was treated, compared to another, and was genuinely solicitous in his dealings with his mother. I think Toga was jealous when she saw the footage, but she doesn't know the truth. I will find time to question Imoko. Myself. I think on this, Tomura would overreact, and Imoko. Izuku knows, there is no turning back, AFO Kurogiri. The warp villain was pleased to hear the different tones in the greeting. There was surprise but also pleasure. It was reassuring given that he was dropping in unannounced. You are alone? Imoko nodded, not offended at the question. It was for his protection as well. And here is secure, he told the bartender with a smile. Here happened to be quite a nicely appointed lounge room. There were 2 plush couches separated by a coffee table. A sideboard was against one wall, decorated with various knickknacks that looked as if they'd been collected over a lifetime. What brings you here? Kurogiri drew his essence in close, resuming his human form. It required a bit of concentration. He preferred to spread out, but Imoko was not an enemy. I think you know. For a moment Imoko looked confused, but then he nodded. He didn't reply. Instead he rose from the couch he had been sitting on and went to the sideboard that was in the room. Kurogiri watched as Imoko pulled out 2 sniffers and a large bottle of whiskey. He was pleasantly surprised to see that it was his favorite. You remembered? I remembered, Imoko replied, bringing the glasses and alcohol to the couch. He put them on the table and again left, disappearing briefly. When he returned he had a small bowl of ice, tons delicately balanced on the top, and a jug of water. The bartender watched as Imoko prepared his drink. The boy really had remembered, Kurogiri thought as he accepted a glass. I take it you disapprove, Imoko said after they'd both taken a sip. Kurogiri sighed. It is not my place to approve, he said diplomatically. But you do. What did Tomura say? Imoko asked. The warp villain shook his head. He doesn't know. Imoko snorted at that and gave Kurogiri an odd smile. It has its dangers, the man admitted, and while Imoko was at least 40 now, thanks to Sensei's quirk, Kurogiri saw again the 14-year-old he had been. I can't say that I have never missed her, he added. Kurogiri remained silent. He was thankful that Izuku was telling him the truth. And he knew from the way the boy was sitting that he was speaking with Izuku, not Imoko. He was sure that after Sensei's training Izuku could lie with the best of them, but this was a hurt Izuku. This was the child the League had taken in, and Kurogiri would listen. I do miss her, and I regret her pain, Izuku said, swallowing hard. But dash with that single word, his voice was hard. I will make sure she is the last. He wasn't sure what Izuku meant with that. Izuku saw his confusion. As always, the boy could read him. Or at least, that's what I'd say if I was giving a speech. I know she won't be the last hurt this way, but maybe this way I can make her pain mean something, maybe I can give her something to live for. Kurogiri nodded. And nothing I've said is a lie. Really? Really, Izuku confirmed. Sensei taught me that the greatest pain lies with the truth. That's what makes it so sad. The police spent 2 days on my case. 2 days and then they moved on. No leads, they said. Not worth pursuing. That makes me angry. You know it is true, the bartender felt obliged to point out. With Sensei involved, there never was going to be any leads. That doesn't make it right, Izuku was unexpectedly fierce. No, it doesn't. There was another case after mine, Izuku continued, ignoring his response. A boy I once knew. He disappeared under similar circumstances. Kurogiri felt a wave of apprehension at the words. Thinking back, which wasn't really that far back, he suspected he knew who Izuku was talking about. A couple of the League's associates had been questioned, which simply told the warp villain that someone in the Winged Boys family had been involved with something very bad. He'd stopped thinking about it after that. The police spent weeks on the case. There were no leads, but somehow it was worth pursuing. The only difference in the case is that he had a quirk. Why did they give her neither hope nor closure? The warp villain didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. Some might say they were sorry. But what did he have to be sorry about? Nothing. This was society's failing. This was what they were trying to prevent. That's why the system has to change, Kurogiri eventually reminded Izuku. That's why the system has to change, he agreed. And making it illegal to discriminate on the basis of a quirk is just one way I will change the system. And the others? The bartender asked, referring to the removal of heroes. That was their true goal. Baby steps, Kurogiri. Baby steps, Izuku told him with a grin. Once the world accepts that the quirkless are people too, it makes it easier to have them accept that the majority of villains aren't really villains. Besides, the government is about to announce compulsory yearly assessment of active heroes, and they actually took it a step further, without my prompting, he added with a laugh. What have they done? Kurogiri was intrigued both at the news and Izuku's mention of prompting. They are extending the assessment to immediate family. Kurogiri was silent. Then he started thinking about the implications. They were huge. What happens if someone fails? Izuku shrugged, making the transition to Imoko again. Depends on how badly. Some heroes are already undergoing counseling, so they'll get off easier, since they are already taking steps to address the problem. Imoko didn't seem impressed with that, but Kurogiri knew the government couldn't be too harsh. They couldn't afford to lose any heroes at the moment. It gets more complicated with the family. Though the idea to extend the assessments to the family came about after the court ordered assessments for all of Endeavor's family. Imoko grinned. Forced, wrongful, long-term incarceration of his wife has not done the poor dear any favors and his eldest children. Imoko chuckled. But his youngest, Kurogiri reminded him. Endeavor's youngest was still enrolled in UA's hero course. His results, or at least an edited version, had been released to the public to prove that despite everything little Shudo did want to be a hero for the right reasons. The foundation will crumble, Imoko shrugged. Shudo was just one more up-and-coming hero, nothing more. I imagine it will, Kurogiri agreed. He'd seen what that type of abuse did. It festered until it could be held back no longer. They sat together in comfortable silence. Kurogiri let himself have the opportunity to enjoy his whiskey. There was so little time these days for just relaxing. I do have something for you this week, Imoko broke the silence eventually. Tomura asked for it a while back, so I was waiting to see Himiko, but if you are here, I might as well tell you now. It's not that time sensitive. The bartender tilted his head in askance. Imoko put his glass on the table before he rose and disappeared. When he returned, he was holding a sheaf of paper. He held it out for Kurogiri to take. You won't be surprised, the politician told him. I'm sure you are suspicious already. Kurogiri wanted to read the documents now, but he knew it was best to wait. With Imoko's hints, he could only imagine how bad it might be for them. This did not bode well, and Kurogiri wasn't buoyed when a sharp grin spread to Imoko's features. The laugh was pure evil. I usually don't mind putting Tomura straight, Imoko said. The warp villain's mind flashed through all the times Izuku and Tomura had had private talks, or where Izuku had explained something to Tomura. He tried not to gulp. I'm actually glad I don't have to tell him this. Kurogiri suppressed a shiver. He really didn't like the sound of that. I thought there are several things happening in the world that the League has largely ignored. Not because they are not important to us. They are. But because there are so many other things to do. I am thankful that I read the information Izuku gave me when I saw him before I gave it to Tomura. Most of the documents were on official letterhead. They were the outlines of a plan. By itself, it was bad. The Hero Public Safety Bureau planned to infiltrate the League. It was a surprisingly bold plan for them. But a plan is just a plan. It was the other documents that were truly dangerous. There were several corroborating documents containing texts and other information which confirmed that the plan was going ahead. Again, that didn't surprise me. The League was now leading most of the underworld. The organized part anyway. There were a few Yakuza families who kept to themselves, and there was always random thugs who thought they could make a quick buck or a name for themselves with their quirk. But the League was where most wanted to be. The original members were enjoying the notoriety, but they were learning that it also took work. So the fact that there was a plan from the HPSB didn't surprise me. What surprised me was the hero chosen to implement that plan. Hawks. The number one hero. Though, looking at the documents, at the time the plan was proposed, he was only the number 2, and it seemed as if Endeavor would cement his position in number 1 by sheer dint of solved cases, if nothing else. To say Tomura was livid would be an understatement. Dabi was similarly angry. They were both ready to go out immediately and attack the hero. Thankfully it was daylight, and we have not yet properly settled from the last move. Tomura calmed, but there is hatred burning in his eyes at the thought. He lashed out at the fire villain a bit too. It is Dabi who has been leading the way in getting Hawks on board. Dabi took some damage. Not a lot. He's more careful than that, but I think he's also aware that taking some damage was the best way to avoid taking more, in the long run. He probably got away with so light a punishment because of the third set of documents in the folder. Izuku has always been interested in quirks. He had supplied an outline of Hawks, complete with official information, and notes on where he believed the information to be deliberately lacking. On the last page of handwritten notes, there was a battle plan, designed to take Hawks out. It required Dabi and several numu. I have no idea how Izuku knew we'd be going after the imprisoned numu. It's possible he didn't know. And his plan was his suggestion that we do. That would be a wise thing to do, actually. It would have given Tomura a subtle nudge in that direction while allowing him to behave as if he'd thought of the plan himself. He might still do that. I know the plan came from Izuku, but the others don't, and Tomura knows I will not contradict him. In public. Which includes in front of the League. Leadership rests on such fragile trust, after all. It has cemented our plan to go after the numu. Tomura is planning it properly now. It has evolved from the break-in and get them into something approaching workable. But that is our plans. It ignores the efforts of Izuku. I believe many of his plans are coming to fruition as well. Not everything, but I can see the foundation. The government has implemented assessments on all heroes. They are to be yearly, but if a big event happens, then they are to be conducted in the aftermath, after a suitable healing time, of course. So far, no one has been tested. The HPSB is still setting up the schedule, but it will be soon. Knowing what I do of heroes, it will be amusing. They probably won't make the failures public, but they will have to do something. That's one advantage villains have over the government and heroes. They have to play by the rules. We don't. And when you have someone making the rules for you, well, that changes the playing field in a whole new way. I don't think the heroes have noticed. I doubt anyone in the government notices either. Why would they think about a first-term representative hustling them? Especially when he gives them such good policies. Because Izuku's policies are popular with the people. Until now, the heroes have comforted themselves that those who have been failing the assessments were not suitable for life as a hero. They have been blind and short-sighted, but the public was supportive. That's what the government saw. They saw the public approval at their care for the yet-to-be heroes. The government saw the public approval for ensuring the mental health of future heroes. There is some petty acceptance there, I'm sure, from those with quirks too weak to be heroes and stupid dreams. They will be assured that they could have passed. They will be assured that it is a good thing. The government now sees public approval for ensuring the ongoing mental health of those who are heroes. They see the upturn from their electorates. They fail to see the long term. They fail to see that sometimes for the benefit of all, one must be cruel. They fail to see how the heroes will fall, how in a few years' time, even if nothing else is done, there will not be enough heroes. I'm sure some see the problem. Others are focused on their opinion polls. It's the little things that give a villain strength. I never thought I'd be thankful that we don't have opinion polls. For us, things are much simpler. Either you succeed or you die. We aren't dead yet. And that's all the assessment we will ever need. AFO political speeches are hard. Kurogiri is good, but there are things he doesn't know or simply doesn't care about. The villain knew. Endeavor fell from grace, he never considered the impact on Endeavor's family. This is Shuto Todoroki's story. Or basically an intermission from Shuto's POV, AFO things Kurogiri doesn't know. Shuto Todoroki was described by most as being restrained. It was not that he did not feel emotion, he did, but he had learned from a young age never to display undue excitement or anger, or disappointment, or regret or anything. He had learned to comply with what his father wanted, and learned that complaints only meant more training. He'd also learned to never question about his mother or his siblings. It was easier about his mother. For a long time, all he remembered was pain when he thought of her. As he grew older, and as he continued the never-ending training his father put him through, he began to understand that his mother had been in pain too. He wanted to lash out at anything. He couldn't. If he lashed out at school, his father would hear and would punish him. If he lashed out, when? Every moment of every day was accounted for. As he grew older, he also realized that his siblings were trying to help. Fuyumi left him small treats in the kitchen. Natsuo left him the latest hero magazines on his bed. Tuya, he was the hardest of all. He tried to fight father. Until one day when he was just not there. Shuto missed the days before he got his quirk. He vaguely remembered playing with his siblings with their mother smiling at them. The memory faded as he grew older, but it was soft and full of perfect sunshine. But he learned that pining for the past did nothing. He learned to look forward. He figured out how to fight back. He learned exactly where father drew the line and was adept at going all the way to that line. Sometimes he went beyond it. Then, if he was lucky, he sported a new bruise, but sometimes it was burns. Never on his face. No, his mother had done that and Endeavor could not afford to do something that crude. It was always on his arms, or torso, where the burn could be a part of training. Endeavor made sure to tell all his teachers that he was in training to be a hero and that a few bruises were normal when learning combat. Since father was the number 2 hero, the teachers accepted the words. Of course they did. Why would they believe him? They'd never believed his siblings. Shuto learned to cope. In that way, only using his ice was a benefit. Burns and bruises both responded to ice. Nothing changed when he got into UA, though got into suggested there might be some doubt about his place. There was none, not with him getting on recommendation. The day was interesting for the others there, but Shuto didn't expect much. The only difference was his father didn't bother to tell the teacher that he was in training to be a hero. They were all in training. Aizawa, pro-hero Eraserhead, did not have the flashiest quirk, but he was strong. Endeavor nodded when Shuto told him which homeroom teacher he had. Shuto thought his father was thankful it wasn't All Might. He looked up Aizawa but couldn't find much information about him. He was an underground hero, and as such did not seek rank or the media. But one thing Shuto could find out, because his father was Endeavor, was the mission clearance rate Aizawa had. It was high, even within teaching. He was a hero who had not let his skills lapse. He wasn't actually sure what to do or what to think when the villains attacked the USJ. He acted. He fought, but he didn't know it was the right thing to do. His father praised him, asking how many he'd taken down. The school berated them but admitted that they had no choice. With the sports festival, Endeavor was relentless. He pushed, which just made Shuto pull back more. His classmates had noticed, but they didn't know what to do. They left him alone. That suited him. Until the final round. Bakugo was loud, crass, and arrogant, but he was also skilled, strong, and practiced. The loss had consequences. Training with his father left him bruised and burned, but he refused to use the bastard's quirk. He would not use fire. Not through work experience. Not through their training with the Pussycats, not with Kamino. Not for anything. He didn't associate fire with anything good until. It was an odd day. He was in school as usual, but then there was an explosion on the phones in the class. Aizawa looked furious, but then his phone also went off. It was only when Momo gasped did their teacher look at his phone. His eyes widened, and he rushed out. Todoroki, Momo told him, holding out her phone. All he saw was a headline saying Endeavor, and then it scrolled to say. No. It couldn't say that name. Tuya. Shuto blinked at the screen stupidly before he pulled out his own phone. There was a news feed blinking urgently at him. His phone was on silent, otherwise it would have been screaming at him. He taped the story and was taken to a video of an interview. There were tags all over it saying it was live. He didn't. What kind of brother was he? He didn't recognize Tuya. There was a bit of familiarity around his eyes, and he'd seen Tuya before. At the training camp. Tuya had been there. He had been a villain. The interview made it clear he was still a villain. Shuto became aware of the class staring at him. He didn't know what to say. So he did what he had always done. He stood up, packed his books, and left. No one tried to stop him. It was only after he'd left the classroom did he wonder what this meant. Then Fuyumi called him. Her voice was shaking. She simply said that she thought he should come home. He did, and found both his siblings there. They were trembling. Shuto got to watch the entire interview that night. He wasn't sure what to do. Everything Tuya said was true. They all had burns. Fuyumi cried. Natsuo tried to comfort her, but no one asked any questions. Shuto wondered, but he didn't know the answer. What did they do now? Tuya was correct. He'd opened the door. It was obvious because Endeavor didn't return that night. But what did they do? He didn't know, and Shuto realized he didn't like that feeling. He went to school the next day, not knowing what else to do. Aizawa called him out. The school wanted to know the truth of Tuya's accusations. And they weren't going to ask Endeavor. Hound Dog was called an illegal representative. Shuto didn't know what to say, but they let Aizawa ask the questions. His homeroom teacher was an odd mix of direct and compassionate, though that compassion was hidden behind a gruff layer of supposed indifference. Shuto, Aizawa asked, and he could hear how tired the pro-hero was. There's really only one question. Is it true? That singular question rolled through his mind. Is it true? Is what true? He didn't want to speak. There were so many answers to that. Is which bit true? He returned the question. Aizawa nodded. He recognized that the first question was too generic. Was that your brother? He changed his question. Shuto was thankful he hadn't asked about Endeavor. He could answer this one honestly. I'm not sure. Tuya, my eldest brother, left when I was 6. He didn't remember much. Tuya was simply there one day and gone the next. You'd have to ask Fuyumi, Shuto added in an attempt to be helpful. You spent the night at home, Aizawa pointed out. Did Fuyumi say anything then? He looked to the side. No one said much of anything. She didn't say it wasn't, he tried to clarify. Shuto, Hound Dog grumbled. We are here to help you, but to help you, we have to know what happened. He nodded. He knew that was true, but no one had ever helped before. Endeavor was I don't care who Endeavor is, Aizawa seemed to read his mind, his eyes glowed red. There were so many extra meanings in that sentence. Shuto nodded but braced himself. If they couldn't ask about Tuya, then they'd ask about him. And he wasn't sure he could handle that. Something must have shown on his face. I don't care who Endeavor is, Aizawa repeated. I care about you, he added. Shuto wasn't sure what to think about that. It's on public record that your father has been training you to be a hero. He stated that several times, to several people, Aizawa continued. He nodded. Endeavor liked to tell his teachers that. However, there is a difference between training and abuse, his homeroom teacher stated fiercely. Hound Dog gave him a look. No one is blaming you, Shuto, UA's counselor said. You have done nothing wrong. We are trying to find out if the villain Dabi was just lying. It was absurd. He felt thankful to the dog-like hero for giving him an out. He could just say he knew nothing. But what type of hero would he be if he couldn't face the truth? What type of hero was he because he couldn't even protect himself? Aizawa was uncanny in his ability to read him. There is a difference between training and actual hero work. That's why you are at UA training here, and yes, you have been injured here, but that's so you don't get injured in the field. But there is a difference between training and abuse. Objectively, Shuto knew that. But, emotionally, no. There was no difference. Was the villain Dabi lying? Aizawa left the question hanging. I don't know what happened with him, or Fuyumi or Natsuo, Shuto said. Of course, you weren't born, Aizawa's face had a small smile on it. Shuto appreciated the lame joke more than he'd care to say. He didn't do anything until my quirk came. I was with Fuyumi when it did. I had been drawing and set the paper on fire. She put it out. But then later that day, I froze my drink. There were nods from everyone. They knew what that meant. Quirks were often difficult to control when they first came out. I didn't know why Fuyumi looked scared then. He remembered her expression. She looked at him with the softest, yet deepest pity. He hadn't understood. His mother had been happy. Shuto knew now that she had believed that Endeavor would calm down, would change, now that he had his precious child with both quirks. Except he didn't. If anything, Endeavor became more driven. Nothing was ever good enough. He no longer had time to play. He never saw his siblings. All he could do was train, and train, and train, and study. That was acceptable. But his bones ached. His muscles ached. He felt hot and cold at the same time. He just ached. It took him a while to learn it was quirk exhaustion. It was his constant companion. The ache and the feeling of tiredness, though Endeavor was careful to ensure that there weren't too many physical symptoms. It was early on, when Tuya disappeared. And then his mother, though he understood that far more than his eldest brother. Then his life became nothing but pain. You learned? Aizawa asked carefully. Shuto bit the inside of his lip. He didn't want to answer that but knew he had to. Yes. He was not proud of how quiet his voice was. Endeavor would yell. Father began training me, Shuto said. Physical training mostly, but I had to keep my grades up. He got in tutors if I needed them, though once Fuyumi was qualified, she could help me. It was the only time he got to see his sister. Your scar? His homeroom teacher prompted. That was on record. Endeavor had ensured that because it meant he could get rid of his wife. I reminded her too much of him, Shuto whispered. The physical pain had hurt, but that had healed. The pain of separation hadn't. At first he hadn't understood, but over time he had. And he forgave her. Yet, he couldn't tell her that. There was no opportunity. There was never any opportunity to be himself. But she was suffering herself, he defended his mother. She had gone through it all. Aizawa gave him a flat look before nodding. Shudo, you know there is a difference between training and abuse. Did your father ever hurt you? He asked pointedly. He wanted to make sure I was ready. Did your father ever hurt you? Aizawa repeated his question. They were just trying. Did your father ever hurt you? Aizawa was relentless. He didn't. Shudo never completed the sentence. His homeroom teacher's eyes were red and glaring at him. Yes. The admission hurt. It burned in his chest, but it was freeing. He felt nauseous with relief. Aizawa drew a heavy breath and shared a glance with Hounddog. UA's counselor shook his head. There was a moment when Aizawa didn't look pleased, but his features cleared quickly. One last question, he said. Did Dabi lie about anything? Shudo shook his head. I don't think so. Aizawa didn't look surprised at that. He grimaced, but it was not the grimace of someone dealing with information they didn't already know. It was the grimace of someone who already knew the answer and know the problems it would cause. You can go, he said. What happens now? Shudo asked. That depends on a lot of things, Aizawa told him. You are one of those things, he added. You, your siblings and your mother will have to decide what to do. He nodded, but he hadn't really understood then. Natsuo explained it later. He had looked up the rules, had looked up what was possible, though Tuya's interview was enough to case Endeavor problems. It caused them all problems. There were those who screamed that all of Endeavor's children were villains. The HPSB came to see him over that, when they extended the Heroes Must Be Heroes psyche assessment. They wanted to publish his results. There was never any mention that he would not pass. Shuto appreciated that. There were also those who thought that Endeavor should just be forgiven. The man had done much for society. He cleared the most missions of any hero, except for All Might. All Might cleared the same and was far more popular with the public than him. There was no competition between the two. Endeavor might think there was, but All Might had won it years ago. That's why he existed. Shuto knew that. But Endeavor no longer seemed to care. He was busy all the time. He had been busy since taking over the #1 position, but this was different. Natsuo had initiated court action. That was all that consumed Endeavor. He cut his first and second sons out of his will. He did everything he could, but Natsuo had the support of many. Dabi. Tuya had, as he said, opened the door. He hadn't just opened it a crack. He'd kicked it open and burned it down. The fire had caught on the rest of the house. And Endeavor, for all his control, could not stop it. Shudo watched. He wasn't sure what to feel. It was confusing for him. At times he felt so much, at others, there was nothing. He passed the assessment. He was almost surprised. His father had said he would be a hero from the time his quirk emerged. He had never really thought about it much, but taking the assessment helped. It clarified things for me. Somewhere along the line, Shudo had decided he wanted to be a hero. The assessment confirmed it, though both Natsuo and Fuyumi had told him they wouldn't think anything less of him if he failed. He understood their reasoning. He'd never been a choice. No one who knew that would blame him. But he wasn't stupid. He knew Japan was comforted with the knowledge that he'd passed. They weren't comforted with the rest of the results. So many failed. There wasn't time to contemplate that. Time continued. Endeavor's court cases finally came to an end. Enji avoided jail, but his hero license was revoked and he had to pay a very large sum to Natsuo, Fuyumi, his wife, and himself. Shudo had agreed with Natsuo and Fuyumi that after everything was done, they would set up a place for their mother to live. They bought her a house. She contributed, and was happy. He visited her. The first time was trying. He didn't cry. He didn't know how to cry, but she did. Yet it was a healing visit. It was good for them both. They had pain they had to work thought, but it was a beginning. He made time to visit her, and the relationship grew. The court even ordered a token amount put aside for Tuya, but since he was an acknowledged villain, any victims could claim against his known assets. The money didn't last for long. Tuya made no attempt to claim it. But for Shuto, the amount was enough that with management, he'd never have to work. But he wanted to. He wanted to make sure that no one else had to go through it. He wanted to save people like his mother, who had suffered so much in silence. He wanted to help, to show the world that he was not his father. It was a nice thought, in a world that was getting harder. Shuto held on to it. It was all he could do. Shoyuta Aizawa stared at the screen. If anyone had seen him, and knew him, they would have thought he was trying to activate his quirk through the screen, or they would have been confused by his choice of viewing. Before him, scattered in seemingly haphazard piles, were papers. It was as if the contents of a corkboard had been vomited over the table. All that was missing was the red string. The screen displayed a single man. He was standing before a podium and was well dressed. He had short green curls, bright green eyes, and an easy smile. There were various things being projected behind him, but the man was a skilled enough orator that he didn't turn. Aizawa, having been a teacher for a few years, appreciated that. He listened to the man for the few moments it took to understand the projection are not actually evil. They are just people who are desperate. A man who lost his job and wants to feed his kids. A woman who just wanted to protect her child. I can name countless examples. You've probably seen them yourselves. But it is the words in that language that we use which makes them all seem worse. Villain. The man said the single word with an impressive degree of emotion, stretching it out to make it all the more sinister. The majority of those we call villains are not. They are simply people. Performing criminal acts, I admit, but they are people. Aizawa resisted the urge to snort. The politician had some point but was glossing over those who were truly evil. But then that's what politicians did. He looked down at the papers, but he already knew what they said. Name, Imoko Kakari, birthdate, 17/07/2XXX quirk, spark. Shoyuta had only been able to find some grainy footage, supposedly from Imoko's teenage years, showing a shower of colorful sparks attributed to the man's quirk. He was not one of those people who had to show off their quirk. Relatives, mother Makata Kakari, father Suzo Kakari, deceased, it was all very normal. The details were public record given Imoko's position as a member of the House of Representatives. He had dinner with his mother once a week and visited the family grave once a year. He turned back to the screen. There was another graph behind the politician. It was a bar chart. There were several which towered over the others. In the majority of the cases with what we like to call villains, the damage from their crimes was actually exacerbated by the so-called hero who apprehended them. Aizawa didn't react, though he could hear the timbre of Imoko's voice. The man was a born orator, and several examples came to mind rather readily at Imoko's pronouncement. The problem was if he could think of them, then the public could think of them. It had nothing to do with insider hero knowledge, it was just knowledge. Relatively simple robberies have descended into hostage situations when heroes have intervened. An easy arrest costs thousands in property damage in the ensuing fight. There are better ways. There are more compassionate ways, and as a society, we have to embrace them. Shoyuta supposed he should be thankful Imoko wasn't mentioning the worst cases he knew about, those where the situation had actually caused deaths. They happened a bit more frequently than he liked, but for whatever reason the politician wasn't mentioning them. The pro-hero looked back to his paperwork. He hadn't become one of the best underground heroes by relying on mere paper. In investigations he never accepted anything unless he had confirmed it himself. The paperwork was immaculate. As it should be, but it was when he looked at the actions that things were odd. As an elected official, Imoko's schedule was public, so Shoyuta had followed his mother. Or at least attempted to. It wasn't that the woman was slippery, it was like she didn't exist. There were pictures of her with her son on the campaign trail. Only a few. But none of her neighbors had anything to say about her. She's quiet and keeps to herself, was the summary answer he'd gotten to all of his questions. Yet there was a bank account in the woman's name. Even as a pro-hero, Shoyuta couldn't find out the balance or any transaction details, not just on his suspicion, but he knew, from observations, that she only ate out once a week, when her son was there. No home-cooked meals for Imoko. Instead, a truly prodigious amount of food arrived for them to eat. And an examination of the apartment building's rubbish indicated that all the food was consumed that night. He'd been very careful in noting who ordered what, and when the containers appeared in the garbage. That meant either Imoko or his mother were using their quirks, and quite frequently at that. There were specific meal plans available for those who had high-output quirks. Except there was no good footage of Spark. And Imoko Kakari's quirk was listed as being rainbow. She could make some small light shows, illusions if she desired. It didn't seem like it would be high energy, and there was no evidence that they were inviting others to dinner when Imoko visited. The food, and where it went, was just another clue to a puzzle that would eventually make sense. Once he had all the pieces. Shoyuta looked back at the screen. Imoko was shaking his head with every appearance of it being regretful. It is a harsh truth that heroics merely feed acts of villainy. Without heroes, there would not be villains. There would only be criminals, but since that is what they are, why do we make the distinction? Quirks, Imoko answered his own question. We are stuck with the adoration of the past, back to the beginning of quirks, back in the 20th century, when they were new. We have adopted their naming convention for those with power. We have adopted a naming convention that was used for fantasy works. Now is not the time for fantasy. It was an interesting analogy, Aizawa had to admit. He'd never truly considered that, but he could recall from his history lessons that there had been a subculture in the 20th century that followed comic book heroes. They were usually someone born different. Those who used their powers for good were heroes, those who didn't were villains. He grimaced. Imoko's words would resonate with the crowd, and with anyone who knew history, and most people knew at least a little bit about the emergence and growth of quirk society. That, though, was a problem for another day. He sighed as he looked back at his notes. He couldn't spend all his time on this case, so the only time he'd seen the woman himself was when she was on her way home after doing whatever she did on the evening she met with her son. Then she never emerged from the apartment building. Imoko did. That made sense. Imoko went home. His mother slept, and Aizawa had classes to teach the next day, so could never remain in the morning. And he had yet to see her on the weekends. She had a small online presence, and all her paperwork was good. But he couldn't quite put his finger on the problem, but couldn't shake the feeling that there was a problem. Villains are an illusion. They are a creation of the media, but they aren't the reality. Using the word villain allows us to forget that they are people. Allows us to comfort ourselves at night with the thought that they were evil, allows us our ignorance. It is easy. It makes a villain into a cover. Aizawa blinked and looked back at the papers. A cover. An illusion. His lips twitched. That was it exactly. Mrs. Kakari was an illusion. Quite a skillful one. And a very well set up one, as all the paperwork was complete and correct. Everything was as it should be. He looked back at the screen, putting the TV on mute as he watched the politician. It led to more questions that it answered. Why did a politician need a cover for a mother? Unless Imoko wasn't who he said he was. Shoyuta shivered. The realization resonated with him, and he felt a surety he'd only felt a few times in his life. If Imoko Kakari was not truly Imoko, then who? The hell was he? I thought the raid on the facility where the government was attempting to treat the numus went well. Without orders, numu are reasonably docile, so the facility wasn't that well protected. The League simply took over one of the security points, one that had access to the building's PA, and then Tomura and Dabi simply ordered the numu to come to them. It actually worked very well. I am still not certain how many numu the heroes retrieved during the incident where Sensei was captured, but having Tomura and Dabi call their numu meant that only those properly conditioned came to us. Each numu has a specific handler, besides Sensei of course. Tomura has control over the most, but Dabi's chainsaw numu is still alive. The fire villain was happy about that, though not as happy as Tomura was to learn that High End was still operational. High End actually displays intelligence. It is simple intelligence, but it recognized its master and was pleased to see Tomura. I am thankful that before the mission, Tomura at least remembered to tell those who were still laboring to create further numu that several would be coming back. They had the rune ready to accept them, and each of the numu seemed pleased to rest in their huge tubes. Of course, now that the numu have been retrieved, there is the question of what the League's next target is. Overhaul or Hawks? Both are tempting for different reasons. Overhaul for his knowledge. He is the one who conceived quirk erasing bullets and then found the means to create them. Hawks for the double cross the hero is intending to perform. Tomura wants the heads of both, though his burning desire for Hawks has diminished. That does not mean he will ever forgive the hero, but he is now able to more calmly think about the situation. That is what makes Tomura dangerous. Not the fact that he will lash out in anger, but the fact that once he calms down, he does not truly let go of his anger, instead he plans. Hawks is the larger danger, since we are still playing along with his plan, and taking him out will make the most impact on society. Taking out the number one hero, again, will cement the League's reputation in general society. Overhaul has knowledge, but the concept is now public, so there are others thinking about it, others trying to make it work. Overhaul might find another way, but that will take time. Thus Hawks should be our target. There is another, far more pragmatic reason to take down Hawks first. As a hero, he is much easier to find. Overhaul has gone to ground. After we took back the quirk erasure bullets, the former Yakuza has been very careful to remain under the radar. I am forced to wonder if the government have arrested him and simply not announced it to the world. That would be like them, especially if one of the underground heroes took him out. Though, I like to think I am well informed about the underground heroes. I do not recall one strong enough to do that. That doesn't mean there isn't one, just that they are truly being underground. If they are that strong, and that dedicated, I imagine when Hero Society falls, they will become a vigilante. I imagine those who have passed the little assessment the Hero Public Safety Bureau has established will all become vigilantes, because they are the ones who truly want to be heroes for what the public would call heroic reasons. I also imagine that they will be watched carefully. They will be expected to lead by example, which would go against what they truly desired. I am looking forward to that day. AFO, it's taken me a long time to find you. Imoko started at the voice. So did Toga, who was currently masquerading as his mother. He turned, looking down the corridor to the speaker. A man stepped out of the shadows. Not literally out of the shadows, but he moved so that he was properly illuminated. Imoko felt he should recognize the dark hair and black eyes, but he didn't. Toga did. She hissed but said nothing. It wasn't really an appropriate sound for his mother, and Imoko waved one hand at her to see if he could bluff his way out of this. He was reasonably sure the answer would be no, but it never hurt to try. My business hours are posted, Imoko said mildly, as if this man was one of his constituents. I would be happy to see you tomorrow. Oh, I think you should see me now, the man insisted, coming forward. This isn't going to be a conversation that should be had in public, now, is it, Mrs. Kakari? Imoko spared a glance at Toga. Her disguise was holding, but her expression was not as cheerful as it usually was. Of course, she said. We've been rude, Imoko, and we should invite the man in. He gave Toga a proper look, but she just nodded. Imoko sighed as Toga opened the door wider. He stepped through, aware of the man behind him. Don't even think about using your quirk, came the soft warning. Imoko looked over to the man. There was something swirling in his hand. You appear to have me at a disadvantage, he said, still trying to remember who this was. The man chuckled as they moved through the apartment's small vestibule into the lounge room. Since Imoko earned a lot, mostly from his business dealings, the apartment was nothing like the one he had shared with his mother not that long ago. This was a rich apartment. There was a lot of space, and 2 leather couches faced each other over a low coffee table. A plush armchair was set up to enjoy the view, which at the moment was the lights of the city. They took seats on opposing couches, settling comfortably before looking back at each other. He's Overhaul, Toga snarled. She didn't make any move to attack though, their seated position could explain why. The word finally triggered Imoko's memory. Overhaul was the one who had developed the anti-quirk bullets. You mean Tomura hasn't killed him? He asked. He would have thought that Tomura would have done something about Overhaul by now. Overhaul didn't laugh. Tomura hasn't killed me, but you have Tomura to thank for letting me. No, you exist. Oh? Imoko made the murmur a question, while he collated what Overhaul would know about him in his mind. It wasn't much. He didn't really know the man, and the main weakness was that he didn't know how much Tomura might have said, or implied about him. The league was always too well funded. They recovered too quickly, the man told him. Their resources weren't the norm, that was the first clue. Even for someone as moronic as Tomura, without cash, there is nothing he can do. So I began searching. It's taken me a long time to find you, though I have Toga here to thank. Overhaul's face stretched into a grin. You suck at watching your back, he told the girl. She bristled, but Imoko put one hand out, which seemed to calm her. Overhaul chuckled. I wondered about that, he murmured. About what? Toga hissed. Which of you is more highly ranked, he replied, not even looking at her. Imoko shook his head before he fixed his eyes on Overhaul. That would be me, he told the man as he tried to focus his quirk. No quirks. Overhaul growled, lifting the swirling vortex again, and something tumbled to the ground. Imoko let his fade. How had Overhaul detected it? Or? He glanced at Toga. She appeared deflated. One of her knives was at her feet. Overhaul meant her quirk, though Imoko wondered what she had been about to do. Obviously she needed to draw blood, but knives were not a part of her quirk and she wouldn't drop it. That was something Overhaul had done. I guess the question is, what do you want? He asked, waving one hand at Toga again. He'd handle this. Just the answers to a few questions, and then I'll deal with business, Overhaul replied before he made an odd movement. Toga made a small sound. Imoko glanced to her as he felt her movement. She was clawing at her face. Her mouth was gone and she was digging into the skin. Her nose was still clear, so the man wasn't trying to kill her yet. A very interesting quirk, Izuku said honestly. He'd never seen something quite like it. Calm, Toga. Calm, he told her. Her eyes locked onto his and Imoko gave her a reassuring nod. A demonstration, Overhaul told him. Besides, I don't want her interfering. The politician knew what that meant. I'm always happy to discuss business, he responded to the earlier suggestion with a sharp smile that let Overhaul know that he wouldn't go without a fight. The former Yakuza just gave him a thin smile, dismissing his threat. Most of it is coming together for me, he said conversationally, just by confirming your existence. You funnel money to the league and have capitalized on their efforts to change the rules. Imoko gave Overhaul his own thin smile as he nodded. There was little point in denying it. It has benefited the league, and your long-term plan is very exciting. It's almost a shame that I have to take you out. Unless you want to dash. No, Imoko interrupted before Overhaul could complete his offer. It was a pity he couldn't use his quirk when he spoke like that, but saying yes would finish this far too quickly. Pity, I think you'd find that I am a much more reasonable boss than Tomura. At that Izuku was forced to give the Yakuza a wry smile. Probably, he allowed, extending himself a little, but I am a member of the League, and the League does not betray their own. Overhaul gave him a look that clearly said he thought Imoko was being naive. Once they start sinking, Tomura will be abandoned. Especially without you. Without the resources you provide, he can't recover. You should think about it. You could save any you liked. Imoko shook his head. Overhaul was thinking the League was something like he'd known. There was no point in explaining. You'd never trust me. He placed particular emphasis on the word trust. It was a very interesting concept. Toga had calmed and was looking at him oddly before she blinked and nodded to herself. Imoko thought she'd figured out what he was going to do. But she didn't know at all. The Yakuza had the good taste not to deny that there would be a lack of trust in any relationship. They formed. A pity then, though I will be entertained by the chaos this will cause. I don't think. You will have much time to be entertained, Imoko said, leaning back, extending himself again. This was what made things so interesting. He had to trust that he had control. He always had to trust that he did, even at the times when it appeared he didn't. The murder of a representative will be investigated closely. They will find it's you. He didn't seem to say anything further. Though to his mind, he could also see how his half-fulfilled plans would collapse. Some would continue but the overall goal would be missed. Oh, I know, Overhaul was relaxed. But consider that they will also find Toga with you. At which point your credibility and reputation, even in death, is ruined. I don't think so, Imoko shrugged as he put his hands on the leather of the couch. Overhaul saw the gesture but did nothing. So long as his hands could still be seen, it was okay. But it was a good beginning and he felt a drain of energy. Just a little. There are many reasons for Toga to be here. Blackmail, for example, threats. I have, as you say, been changing the rules. He wasn't sure if Toga's quirk-induced form survived if she was unconscious, and therefore he had no idea if her form might persist into death. He suspected not, but quirks were odd like that, it was a possibility. Finding him, murdered with his mother, would be tragic but not an ending he wanted. It was not what would happen. Imoko glanced too. Toga. Even with the enforced gag, she was being uncharacteristically quiet. She was glaring at Overhaul, but the man was completely ignoring her. I think you can release her now, Imoko murmured, pushing a little more power out. He resisted the urge to snarl. He'd had a long day, and hadn't eaten since lunch. This was not what he needed now. Oh. Is little Toga going to be quiet? Overhaul mocked. Imoko hoped Himiko would go along with it. She nodded, and then kept her head down as Overhaul rearranged her features again. Interesting, he commented. It doesn't cause pain? Toga hadn't moved. Overhaul looked at him like he was stupid. It causes great pain. The bitch gets off on pain, you know that. He glanced to the girl sitting beside him and nodded. That made more sense. So, just knowing who I am can't have answered everything for you, he said to Overhaul, opening up the conversation. It answered a lot, the Yakuza replied. Though there are a few niggling queries. Imoko grinned. It was a genuine expression. I don't get to brag that often, so indulge me, he encouraged. Why aren't you the League's leader? The question was asked with an almost idle air, but Imoko could see the implications. Overhaul thought he was the more intelligent man, the better candidate. Do you think I could juggle the House of Representatives, the League, and my businesses? Imoko returned with his own question, extending himself. His stomach poked him in protest, though thankfully it was not loud. It was beyond time this was over, but he needed an opening. With competent underling Imoko held up one hand, not letting Overhaul finish. And who would be that? He asked, arching one eyebrow gently. The statement was deliberately designed to be open, to be amusing. Overhaul gave a bark of laughter. True, he conceded. Imoko cocked his head. He couldn't smile at Overhaul's laugh. He would use it. What else? There was a flash in Overhaul's eyes that warned Imoko the next question would be far more probing. Who are you? He's Imoko, Toga replied for him. No, you stupid girl. He's not. Imoko Kakari is as much a fiction as you. So who are you? I'll make sure you are buried with your real name. Imoko put his hand on Toga's thigh, calming her down as he chuckled. He wanted to say he was no one, but that would transfer Overhaul's anger to him, and he needed the man agreeable. My name won't mean anything to you, but it is Izuku Midoriya. There was no spark of recognition. There wasn't going to be. His disappearance had not been well reported, but Imoko could tell that Overhaul believed him. You are right, it means nothing, and I think it's time to end this. Funnily enough, I was thinking the same thing, Imoko said, stretching out his senses and driving them at Overhaul, and all you need to do is trust me. The words immediately set Overhaul on alert, and Imoko watched as he tried to activate his quirk. Too slow. The instant Imoko had finished speaking, he had driven his hand down the back of the couch, seeking the pistol he'd left there. Toga appeared shocked when she saw it, and Imoko wasted no time, but was careful to ensure his aim was true as he shot one bullet into Overhaul. He only had one bullet here. Blood blossomed as the bullet penetrated Overhaul's shoulder. You missed. Toga shrieked, jumping forward, pulling one of her knives from somewhere. I didn't, Imoko assured her, again extending his power. It was enough, just to keep her from cutting Overhaul's throat. That would be a waste. What have you done? Overhaul snarled, and rolling his forearm in a way that should be significant. Himiko, knife at the throat, but there is no need to cut, Imoko instructed, before deciding it was better if he didn't rise. His vision was watery, and it would completely ruin the image if he was to collapse now. Toga was quick to comply, pressing her knife into Overhaul's throat. He recognized the threat too late. What have you done? He screamed. I think you know, Imoko replied, lowering the gun and shifting slightly as he retrieved the casing. He held it up. It was amusing to see two sets of eyes recognize it. No! Overhaul screamed, before Toga pressed her knife deeper. She knew they couldn't really afford the commotion. I think it's rather ironic, Imoko said conversationally. Himiko snickered. Izuku. She purred his real name. It really didn't seem right coming from the form of the older woman. Do not call me that, in that form, Imoko said immediately. Toga seemed to understand. Give me his phone, he instructed her, and watched as Toga went through Overhaul's pockets. She was careful to never let the pressure of her knife abate, and eventually she held up the phone. Unlock it, Imoko ordered. Himiko giggled but complied, holding the screen in front of Overhaul's face for a moment before she tossed the phone to him. How? Overhaul growled. Imoko considered the question. He really needed to eat, but he couldn't give off any sign of weakness. The Yakuza had to know he wasn't going to get out of this predicament, so why was he seeking the information? And it would reveal information to Toga, who wouldn't tell anyone. He'd seen to that already. Imoko dialed a number from memory but didn't press send as he looked at Overhaul. My quirk is useless for combat, he explained. Instead, it relies on the mind, on trust, on suggestion. A moment is all I need, just one where you think favorably of me. That was all he said before touching send. The phone rang. Imoko saw Overhaul thinking about the implications of his words, trying to work out his quirk, but he'd been vague enough that there would still be doubts. The phone continued ringing. Imoko resisted the urge to glare, but eventually it was picked up. There was silence on the other end. Kirojiri, Imoko said firmly. Overhaul recognized the name. So did Toga. I have a gift for Tomura, Imoko said quickly, knowing that the bartender would recognize his voice. Could you warp it from here? There was a few moments of silence before a warp gate opened, and Kurogiri's eyes formed in the mist. He took in the situation before shifting the gate. "And can you deliver me a shake?" Imoko asked impishly, gesturing towards the coffee table. Even as Mist Kurogiri looked disapproving. "No one makes them like you do." Imoko begged, using the words to hide the fact that he was going to have trouble moving. The older villain seemed to understand as he closed in around Overhaul. "You won't win." The Yakuza barked. Despite the tiredness Imoko felt, and the way his vision was becoming dangerously narrow, Imoko smiled. "I already have a fop."
That's it for today. Remember to show your support to the creator of this story if you enjoyed it. If you would like more parts of the story to be uploaded, leave a comment and subscribe to get notified when the story continues. Bye-bye for now, and I hope that you all have a wonderful rest of your day.